Welcome, fellow seekers of hidden truths. Before we sink into the shadows of November 1963, I want to pause and reach out to you, wherever you are in this vast world. How's your day been? Are you listening as the sun dips below the horizon? Or maybe during those quiet, haunted hours when most of the world is asleep? Whether you're tuning in from the chaos of New York City, the foggy highlands of Scotland, the neon-soaked streets of Tokyo, or someplace quieter in between, just know, you're not alone. You're not the only one questioning the stories we've been told, the headlines we've accepted. You're not the only one who feels something doesn't add up. What time is it where you are? Are you settling into bed with your earbuds in, letting the dark wrap around you like a blanket? Or maybe sneaking in a listen during a lunch break, hungry not for food, but for answers? However, and whenever this story has found you, I'm grateful you're here. If stories like this ones that dig deeper, that question the polished versions of history speak to you, then consider subscribing to Mr.X Files. We're building something more than just a channel. It's a gathering of curious minds, of people who know the truth is rarely simple and never dull. Click that subscribe button, because the strangest stories are often the real ones. And trust me, we've only just scratched the surface. Now, let me tell you a story, a dying man's confession. One that will change the way you see that terrible day in Dallas. My name doesn't matter anymore. I'm dying. The cancers in my lungs spread too far to fight, and weirdly, that brings a sort of clarity I never had when I was young. They say confession is good for the soul. Maybe that's true. Maybe by finally telling the truth, I can find peace in these final weeks. Or maybe I just need someone to hear me before I go. I wasn't in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. I was 26 years old, fresh out of Yale, math degree in hand, heart full of patriotic dreams. I thought I was going to make a difference. The CIA recruited me straight into data analysis. Clean job for clean hands, they told me. I wouldn't be in the field. I wouldn't be hurting anyone. Just crunching numbers, analyzing patterns, keeping the homeland safe from the Soviet threat. What they didn't say, what they couldn't say, is that some patterns, once seen, never let you go. I remember exactly where I was when the news hit. Third floor of Langley HQ, inside what we called the fish tank. It was a glass-walled room packed with junior analysts like me, neck-deep in intelligence reports. We were young, serious, trying to prove we belonged. Mrs. Henderson, the secretary, burst in, hand over her mouth. Her eyes were soaked with tears. "The president's been shot," she whispered. Time stopped, not just in our office. It felt like the whole world froze. There was this stillness, like the air had been sucked out of the room. The kind of silence that follows lightning, right before the thunder hits. Someone brought in a TV cart, wheeled it into the middle of the floor. We all crowded around it like kids at a sleepover, only no one was smiling. Walter Cronkite appeared on the screen, voice shaking, delivering the kind of news no one wants to believe. But that wasn't when I really learned what happened. That came 3 weeks later. I was reassigned to a classified task force. Our job was to go through every piece of footage, every testimony, every photograph related to the assassination. Just cataloging, they told us. Just analysis. That's when I saw the real Zapruder film, not the edited version the public's seen. Not the one conspiracy theorists obsess over. I'm talking about the original, the raw, uncut footage. High clarity, no frames missing. No blurs. It hit me like a punch to the gut. There weren't 2 shots. Not 3 either. There were echoes. So many echoes. Bouncing off the buildings around Dealey Plaza like ghosts. It was chaos masked as simplicity. You could hear the truth in those echoes, and you could see it too, if you knew where to look. I've watched that film thousands of times since. Slowed it down frame by frame. Watched the light, the movement, the people. Jackie Kennedy's pink Chanel suit, pristine at first, the crowds cheering. The president waving, flashing that same smile Americans had fallen in love with. And then, the moment everything shattered, 12:30 p.m. Central Time, the motorcade made that slow, fateful turn onto Elm Street. And in an instant, the United States of America died, at least the version we believed in. What came out of that smoke and confusion wasn't the same country. It was a machine that could keep secrets this dark for decades, and still smile for the cameras. Lee Harvey Oswald. Even now, the name makes my chest tighten. Not because I believe he pulled the trigger, but because I'm almost certain he didn't act alone. Or maybe he didn't act at all. The official version is neat, clean, one angry Marxist, one cheap rifle, one high window, one president, but real life? Real life is never that simple. And the truth? The truth is so much darker. The Texas School Book Depository was tidy, contained, and supposedly case closed. But I've read the files, the ones still marked classified, even now. I've seen the surveillance reports that were never supposed to see daylight. And I can tell you this, Lee Harvey Oswald was a lot of things: confused, angry, desperate for meaning. He wanted to be a revolutionary, but he was a lousy marksman. And he wasn't acting alone. The CIA had been tracking Oswald since 1959, when he defected to the Soviet Union. This wasn't some casual, low-level observation. It was active surveillance. They monitored him from the moment he came back to the US with his Russian wife, Marina. They knew about his public support of Fidel Castro in New Orleans. They knew about his strange ties to anti-Castro Cuban exiles. They knew he'd gone to Mexico City just weeks before the assassination, trying, allegedly, to get visas to Cuba and the Soviet Union. They knew all of it, and they did nothing, or maybe they did exactly what they intended to do. I've read the internal memos. The language is cold, buried in careful, bureaucratic phrasing, just vague enough to give them cover, just clear enough for those of us inside the machine to understand. Oswald wasn't just being watched. He was being handled, nudged, used. That morning, November 22nd, Oswald got a ride to work from a co-worker named Buell Wesley Frazier. He carried a long package wrapped in brown paper. When Frazier asked about it, Oswald shrugged and said it was curtain rods for his new place. After the shooting, that same package was suddenly declared to be the murder weapon. A 6.5mm Carcano rifle, allegedly bought by Oswald under the alias A. Hidell through a mail-order catalog. But the Warren Commission never told the public the full story. FBI ballistics experts initially couldn't match the bullets found in Dealey Plaza to that rifle, not conclusively. And the so-called magic bullet, Commission Exhibit 399, the chain of custody was a mess. Evidence was mishandled, mislabeled, even misplaced. In any real courtroom, that bullet wouldn't have been admissible. And then there were the witnesses. Several employees in the book depository reported seeing Oswald in the second floor, lunchroom before and immediately after the shooting, calmly drinking a Coca-Cola. Officer Marion Baker and Building Superintendent Roy Truly encountered him. They're just 90 seconds after the final shot. Oswald wasn't sweating. He wasn't winded. He didn't look like someone who had just fired 3 shots from a 6th-floor window, hit a moving target, and sprinted down 4 flights of stairs. He was standing there, sipping a Coke. Still, they arrested him. Not for killing the president. There wasn't enough evidence for that yet. But for shooting a Dallas police officer named J.D. Tippit, who'd been gunned down in a different part of town nearly an hour later. The case against Oswald for Tippit's murder was just as flimsy. But it gave the authorities a reason to hold him while they scrambled to connect the dots into a narrative that would satisfy a shocked and grieving nation. For 2 days, Oswald insisted he was innocent. "I'm just a patsy," he told reporters. as they dragged him through the halls of the Dallas Police Department, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in his face. Those 4 words have haunted me ever since. Because I believe him. He was a patsy, but not a random one, not some guy who just happened to be in the wrong place. Oswald was chosen. Someone with just enough suspicious associations to make him a perfect fall guy. His time in the Soviet Union made him look like a communist. His pro-Castro leaflets made him a radical. His Marine Corps' record gave the illusion of precision and discipline. Never mind that his marksmanship scores were barely average. The CIA had his psychiatric profile, and I've seen it. It showed instability, insecurity, a deep need to prove himself. The perfect kind of man to manipulate. The perfect kind of man to silence if he started asking the wrong questions. That's why Jack Ruby had to kill him. The Zapruder film, you've heard of it. Maybe you've seen it. The shaky 8mm footage that captured the moment history changed. Abraham Zapruder, just a bystander with a camera, standing on a concrete pedestal. His home movie became the most analyzed film in human history. But what the world saw wasn't what he filmed. In December of '63, I was part of a 7-person CIA team assigned to review the unedited footage. We were locked in a windowless basement. Room at Langley, armed guards at the door, no phones, no outside contact. We were told not to speculate, not to theorize. Just observe, catalog, report. Our supervisor was James Jesus Angleton, the head of counterintelligence. A cold, chain-smoking specter of a man who never blinked and never spoke unless he had to. The public version of the Zapruder film. It was edited, carefully, deliberately. Over 40 seconds of footage were cut. Not missing by accident removed, because they showed too much in the full version. We saw the president's head snap back into the left when the fatal bullet struck. Not forward. Not slumping as the official report claimed. Back. Hard. The kind of movement that only happens when a force hits from the front. From the front. Not from Oswald's window. Behind and above the motorcade. The physics were undeniable. Lone gunman theory was dead the moment we watched that reel. But we weren't allowed to say that. Not even to each other. So we buried the truth in silence. And now, decades later, I've got nothing left to lose. No family. No job. Just the clock, ticking down on a life that's almost over. But I needed to say it. Lee Harvey Oswald didn't act alone. And the story we've been told, the one printed in textbooks, the one solemnly repeated every November, was written too. Keep us quiet. To keep us calm. To keep us from looking too closely at the men who really had the motive, the power, and the reach to pull the trigger. But what damned the official story more than the movement of Kennedy's head was what the camera caught behind the wooden picket fence on the grassy knoll, a faint puff of gun smoke. It was visible for less than a second, a small white cloud drifting up into the air, just as the president's head violently snapped and burst apart. In 1963, bullets were still made with sulfur and potassium nitrate chemicals that produced visible smoke when fired. The Warren Commission would later insist that modern ammunition didn't give off smoke. That was a lie. I've seen the ballistics tests they ran. I've read the reports. They knew damn well that ammunition from that era produced visible discharge. And they also knew that multiple witnesses had reported both seeing and smelling gunpowder from the direction of the grassy knoll. Julia and Mercer said they saw men with rifles near the overpass. Gordon Arnold, a soldier home on leave, claimed a bullet flew directly over his head from behind the fence. S.M. Holland, a railroad supervisor, ran straight to that fence seconds after the shooting and found fresh footprints and cigarette butts. Someone had been waiting there, but the most chilling testimony? It came from someone the Warren Commission never even called, the Beverly Oliver. She was standing directly across from the grassy knoll when the first shot rang out. She told FBI agents that she saw a man in a dark suit raise a rifle and fire from behind the fence. Her interview was classified highest level. I've read the transcript. I watched the archived footage. She told them, plain as day, there was a man behind that fence and he shot President Kennedy. I saw the smoke. I heard the crack. I saw him run toward the railroad tracks. But no one listened, or rather, they refused to listen. Because if her story was true, the entire narrative collapsed. Beverly Oliver's words, combined with the unedited Zapruder film, would have shattered the lone gunman theory, proven, without a doubt, that there was a second shooter, a conspiracy. So, what happened? Her interview was buried deep in a classified file, sealed until 2039, 75 years after Kennedy's murder. And that film? The Zapruder film? The public copy wasn't the only one. There were missing frames gone. But even that wasn't the worst of it. The original autopsy photos from Bethesda Naval Hospital clearly showed the back of Kennedy's skull blown out, exactly what you'd expect from a shot fired from the front. But the photos released to the Warren Commission had been retouched. The exit wound had magically moved from the back of the head to the right side, matching the story of a shot from behind. I know, because I was there in the room when the photo analysis team laid the original hospital photographs beside the edited versions. You didn't need to be an expert to see the difference. The originals showed a massive gaping hole in the back of the head. The altered ones? The wound was repositioned, cleaned up, consistent with a lone gunman firing from the rear. I remember turning to my supervisor, asking him, why? Why change it? He didn't blink, just stared at me with those cold, empty eyes, the kind you get from carrying too many secrets, and said, sometimes, son, the truth isn't in the national interest. And that's what haunts me. Not whether there was a conspiracy. The evidence is overwhelming. No, what eats at me is who's behind it. I don't believe it was just one group. It was a convergence, a perfect storm of powerful men whose interests aligned. A shadow network that saw Kennedy as a threat that had to be neutralized. At the center of that web was the CIA, more specifically, the Counterintelligence Division, led by James Jesus Angleton. Brilliant, paranoid, a man obsessed with rooting out communist plots, even if he had to manufacture them. He believed the ends always justified the means. Angleton helped design the CIA's assassination programs, MK, Operation Phoenix. He knew how to eliminate people quietly, surgically. And he hated Kennedy. Why? The Bay of Pigs. In April 1961, the CIA launched an invasion of Cuba using a brigade of exiles. It failed spectacularly. Their forces were slaughtered on the beaches. They begged President Kennedy for air support. He refused. They were left to die. Afterward, Kennedy reportedly told a close friend, I want to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. That sentence was his death warrant, but the CIA didn't act alone. They had help from the military-industrial complex, from high-ranking generals, from defense contractors who were terrified of Kennedy's policies. He wanted to pull American advisors out of Vietnam. That meant war profits gone. He was pursuing peace with the Soviets, easing Cold War tensions. That meant no need for a bloated defense budget. General Curtis LeMay, the Air Force Chief of Staff, once described Kennedy's policies as borderline treason. And then there was General Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He had presented Kennedy with something called Operation Northwoods, a plan to fake terrorist attacks on American soil to justify invading Cuba. Kennedy rejected it outright. Furious. It became clear to these men that Kennedy wasn't just naive, he was dangerous to their control, to their money, to their war. So they made a choice. And on November 22, 1963, in Dallas, Texas, that choice played out in broad daylight. The country saw a man get shot, but I saw the truth get buried. Moment, but there's no way that's true. You don't just stumble into one of the most high-profile security zones in the country. At the exact moment the most infamous suspect in American history is being transferred, and shoot him point blank. In front of dozens of police officers and TV cameras, unless you knew exactly what you were doing and wide out the reality. Jack Ruby was silencing a loose end. Let's go back, Operation Northwoods. That's where it really started to unravel for me. A plan drafted by the U.S. military to carry out terrorist attacks against American citizens, real attacks, with real casualties, and blame them on Cuba. Why? To manufacture public support for an invasion. Kennedy read the plan, and he was horrified. He rejected it outright. But the mere existence of that document proved something chilling. The military's top brass was not only willing but eager to kill innocent Americans if it helped them achieve their geopolitical goals. And if they were willing to kill civilians. What made us believe they'd hesitate to eliminate a president who stood in their way? That's what kept me up at night. Then came the Mafia. The CIA had long used organized crime to do their dirty work, especially in their efforts to kill Fidel Castro. Mob bosses like Sam Giancana, Santo Trafficante, and Carlos Marcello had worked hand in glove with U.S. intelligence. It was a marriage of convenience, shared enemies, shared deniability. But everything changed when Bobby Kennedy became attorney general. He launched the most aggressive crackdown on organized crime in American history. Suddenly, their friends in government had turned into enemies. Carlos Marcello, the New Orleans Don, was furious. According to reports, he told close associates, "If you want to get rid of the dog, you cut off the head." Meaning, kill the president. And Bobby Kennedy goes with him. Sam Giancana, the man who'd helped rig the 1960 election in Chicago to push JFK into the White House, felt double-crossed, betrayed. Santo Trafficante, with deep Cuban ties and serious money on the line, had his own motives. Now imagine this. The CIA wants Kennedy gone. The Pentagon sees him as a traitor. The mob wants revenge. Each group had its reasons. Each group had something to gain. And more importantly, each group could use the others as cover. The CIA could blame rogue generals. The generals could point to the Mafia. The Mafia could say it was Cuban exiles. It was the perfect crime wrapped in chaos. But there was one more player. I didn't expect to find one that shocked me to my core: the Federal Reserve. On June 4, 1963, Kennedy signed Executive Order 11,110. It authorized the Treasury, not the Federal Reserve, to issue silver-backed currency. If the policy had gone into full effect, it would have undercut the Fed's monopoly on printing money. It would have shifted financial power away from a private central bank and back to the U.S. government. After his death, the order wasn't repealed. It just disappeared. Like it never existed. That's not a coincidence. That's a message. The deeper I dug, the more one name kept surfacing: David Atlee Phillips. He was CIA, a master of disinformation, a specialist in propaganda. He'd worked closely on anti-Castro operations and had ties to organized crime. Witnesses in Mexico City saw someone matching Oswald's description, meeting with handlers near the Cuban and Soviet consulates. But when those same witnesses were shown Oswald's photo after the assassination, some said that wasn't the man they saw. Was it Phillips? Was he impersonating Oswald? Running a false flag op to frame the Soviets? Or Cubans? I couldn't prove it. But the circumstantial evidence piled up. I found a pattern: compartmentalized operations. Each faction running its own piece of the plan, all part of a larger mosaic, none fully aware of the whole. Oswald was the patsy, the fall guy, the man set up to take the blame. The actual shooters? Likely Cuban exiles, trained, disciplined, and lethal. The cover-up involved key figures in the FBI, elements within the Secret Service. And yes, even the Warren Commission. They all played their roles, some knowingly, others unwittingly. And at the center of it all was a hard truth I've lived with for 57 years, President John F. Kennedy wasn't murdered by a lone madman. He was executed by a shadow government. Because peace and independence are dangerous to empires built on fear. And Jack Ruby? They called him a grieving patriot. A nightclub owner who acted out of emotion, but Ruby, real name Jacob Leon Rubenstein. Been embedded in organized crime since the 40s. He ran guns to anti-Castro Cubans. He had ties to Marcelo and Trafficante. More damning, he had been an FBI informant since the early 50s, feeding them intel on communist infiltration in labor unions. He wasn't just connected, he was deeply embedded. His killing of Oswald? That wasn't rage. That wasn't grief. It was a cleanup job. Look at his movements that day. November 24th, 1963. Morning. Ruby leaves his apartment with his dog, Sheba, drives to Western Union, sends a money wire to one of his strippers. Simple errand, but then, instead of going home, or to his club, he walks toward the police station. No gun in hand. Just walking, calm, confident. He enters through the garage entrance. Somehow no one stops him. No one checks him. He goes down into the basement where Oswald is about to be transferred. The timing is too perfect. And when Oswald appears handcuffed, surrounded by cops, Ruby steps forward, raises a small caliber revolver, and fires into Oswald's gut. One shot, enough to kill him. Enough to silence him. Enough to seal the narrative. The official story says it was spur of the moment, but nothing about it was random. Ruby's presence, his access, the timing, it was all arranged. He wasn't acting alone. He was following orders. Orders from people who needed Oswald dead before he could talk. And so, the final witness to the truth died in a basement on live television as the American people looked on, believing they were watching justice when in fact they were watching history being erased in real time. The story that America was told, the one about a lone gunman and a vigilante nightclub owner, is full of cracks. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became. Jack Ruby didn't just happen to be in the right place at the right time. He had been preparing. For 2 days leading up to the shooting, Ruby had been asking detailed questions about the timing and location of Lee Harvey Oswald's transfer. Not just casually, he knew the schedule better than some of the officers guarding Oswald. When the moment came, Ruby wasn't wandering by. He was exactly where he needed to be. Even more troubling were the reports that Ruby had been mingling with Dallas police officers in the days between Kennedy's assassination and Oswald's murder. He wasn't just lurking in the shadows. He was handing out sandwiches and coffee to overworked cops and reporters who were scrambling to cover the biggest story of the decade. He was working his way into their good graces, becoming a familiar, harmless presence. He made sure they'd recognize him when it mattered. That moment arrived at 11:21 a.m. on November 24th, 1963. Oswald was being led through the basement of the Dallas Police Department. Cameras rolled, officers flanked him. And then Ruby stepped forward out of nowhere and fired a single bullet into Oswald's gut with a .38 caliber Colt Cobra. Oswald collapsed. He was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, where he died 2 hours later, the same hospital where President John F. Kennedy had been pronounced dead just 2 days earlier. As police swarmed Ruby, his first words were chilling. "You all know me, I'm Jack Ruby." He wasn't introducing himself. He was reminding them, "I'm one of you. You've seen me around. I belong here." At first, Ruby acted like he had done the nation a favor avenging the president. But once he was behind bars, his mind began to unravel. Paranoia set in. He raved about global consequences, claiming Jews around the world would be murdered because of his actions. He begged authorities to take him to Washington, insisting he had more to say, that the full truth hadn't come out. "There's so much that hasn't surfaced," he told the Warren Commission during his testimony. "The world will never know." The true facts of what occurred. My motives, the people who had so much to gain, and had such an ulterior motive for putting me in this position, they will never let the true facts come above board. When Chief Justice Earl Warren pressed him to explain, Ruby grew desperate. "I want to tell the truth," he pleaded. "And I can't tell it here. If you don't take me back to Washington tonight and give me a chance to prove to the president that I'm not guilty of this, then you will see the most tragic thing that will ever happen." Warren refused. 3 years later, Ruby died of a pulmonary embolism in prison. He was never moved to Washington. He never testified further. Whatever secrets he carried died with him. But before the end, Ruby made several disturbing remarks that still haunt me. To his psychiatrist, he confessed it was an act of overthrowing the government. To a reporter, the world will never know the true facts. And to his rabbi, I did it for the American people. What did he mean by that? Did Ruby believe he was shielding the public from truths too horrifying to face? Or had someone convinced him, manipulated him, that silencing Oswald was a patriotic duty? Years later, buried in a mountain of documents that were supposed to have been destroyed, I found a classified FBI memo dated November 25, 1963. It read, "Subject's actions prevented comprehensive interrogation of primary suspect. This development serves operational security interests and reduces risk of exposure for sensitive assets." Cold, bureaucratic language. But the meaning was clear. Ruby had stopped Oswald from talking, and in doing so, protected covert operations and possibly CIA personnel. He didn't act out of grief. He acted as part of something larger, something orchestrated. The tragedy of Jack Ruby isn't just that he killed Oswald, it's that his bullet killed our only chance of uncovering who was truly behind Kennedy's assassination. And I've come to believe that was always the plan. By the spring of 1964, I realized I'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than a lone gunman scenario. Kennedy's death was just the beginning, a public execution that signaled the rise of a new shadowy order. In the months that followed, the deaths kept coming, not random, not coincidence. Witnesses, investigators, journalists, people who had gotten too close to the truth. They died in accidents, overdoses, and sudden illnesses. It was like a silent purge. Dorothy Kilgallen, a respected journalist and TV personality, had become obsessed with the case. She was the only reporter to ever interview Ruby in private. Friends say she told them she was close to cracking the real story. In November 1965, she was found dead in her New York apartment, officially ruled an overdose of alcohol and barbiturates. But her notes from the Ruby interview? Gone. Vanished. Then there was David Ferrie, a strange man, former pilot, investigator, and somehow connected to both Oswald and New Orleans crime boss Carlos Marcello. He was under federal investigation. Days before he was scheduled to testify, he was found dead in his apartment. The coroner said it was natural causes, but 2 typed suicide notes were found nearby. Suicide or silencing. These weren't isolated cases. They formed a pattern. People who got too close didn't just disappear, they were erased. And the deeper I looked, the more dangerous it felt. The kind of danger that doesn't just follow you, it waits in the dark, patient, watching. Carlos Marcello, the New Orleans mob boss, had always been on the FBI's radar, but after President Kennedy was killed, the scrutiny intensified. Marcello had ties to both Lee Harvey Oswald and David Ferrie, and when New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison launched his own investigation into the assassination in 1967, Marcello was a key suspect. Garrison was preparing to bring charges, but before he could, Ferrie was found dead in his apartment. The official cause? A brain aneurysm, but the timing, it was far too convenient. Then there was Mary Pinchot Meyer. Her death still bothers me more than most. She wasn't just another name in a file. She was President Kennedy's mistress, yes, But more importantly, she was outspoken against the CIA, against the Vietnam War. She was one of the few people who could reach Kennedy on a deeply personal level, and she'd been urging him to withdraw troops, to break away from the deep state entanglements he was trapped in. And there's more, she was previously married to Cord Meyer, a high-ranking CIA official. That gave her access, insight, dangerous knowledge. On a quiet day in October 1964, Mary was shot while walking along the Potomac River in Georgetown. No robbery, no motive. A man named Ray Crump Jr., a young black laborer, was arrested, but he was quickly acquitted. The prosecution couldn't place him at the scene with the murder weapon, and the entire case fell apart. The killer was never found. What made her death especially alarming was what followed. CIA counterintelligence. Chief James Jesus Angleton. That Angleton, the same man who personally oversaw my analysis of the Zapruder film, broke into her home and her art studio. He wasn't looking for souvenirs. He wanted her diary. He found it, and according to his later testimony, he destroyed it. Why? What had she written in there? What had Kennedy confided in her about the CIA, about his plans to reshape the intelligence community or dismantle it entirely? We'll never know. Angleton made sure of that. And this wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout the 60s, the deaths piled up. Reporters investigating the assassination turned up dead car crashes, freak accidents, sudden heart attacks. Witnesses who had given conflicting statements started dying off. Even FBI agents who raised questions about the official narrative weren't immune. They too began dying under suspicious circumstances. By 1967, a statistician named Richard Charnin tried to quantify the unlikeliness of it all. He calculated the odds of so many related deaths happening naturally, 100 billion to 1. You don't need to be a mathematician to know that doesn't happen by chance, and somewhere in the middle of it, I started to fear for my own life. It was early 1965 when the shift happened. Quiet, no explanation. I was transferred out of the Assassination Analysis Unit and assigned to a desk job in administrative operations. My clearance was downgraded. Doors that had once opened for me were suddenly locked. I was told the work I'd done was now need to know, and that I no longer needed to know, but I did know. I had seen too much. I had copies of internal memos, early drafts of witness interviews, and high-resolution frames of the unedited Zapruder film. I had records that contradicted the Warren Commission's findings. I had testimonies from people who were afraid, terrified, really to speak on the record. And I had a growing, bone-deep certainty that powerful forces inside the United States government had orchestrated the president's murder and were methodically wiping out anyone who might expose them. Then came 1968, when Robert F. Kennedy announced he was running for president. I felt a mix of hope and dread. Hope, because if anyone had both the motive and the political clout to reopen his brother's case, it was Bobby. Dread, because I knew that the people who killed JFK would not let Bobby reach the White House. And they didn't. On June 5th, 1968, Bobby Kennedy was shot in the kitchen pantry of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. The official story named Sirhan as the lone gunman. But multiple witnesses reported hearing more shots than Sirhan's gun could hold. The autopsy showed Bobby was shot from behind at point-blank range, while Sirhan was in front of him, and never got closer than 3 feet. That night, something broke inside me. I packed everything I had, copies of documents, photos, personal notes, and put them in a safe deposit box. The next morning I resigned from the CIA. No announcement, no farewell. I just vanished. Took a job in private consulting. Changed my phone number. Left my past behind. For 30 years, I told myself it was the right decision. That I was protecting my family. That the truth, however important, wasn't worth dying for. That someone else, someday, would come forward and finish what I started. But no one ever did. The files stayed sealed. The deaths were forgotten. And the truth about what happened in Dallas on November 22, 1963, was buried so deep, most people stopped even asking the questions. That's why I'm writing this now, because I'm dying. The doctors say I have weeks, maybe days. Lung cancer. Stage 4. It's already in my liver, my spine, even my brain. Death isn't knocking. It's already inside, rearranging the furniture. And oddly, that knowledge has set me free. They can't silence me anymore. Not effectively. I've beaten them to it. In these final days, I find myself thinking constantly about President Kennedy. Not just his death, but what it symbolized. No, he wasn't perfect. No leader is. But he stood for something, a vision of America that was hopeful, bold, unafraid to challenge the machinery that runs the world from the shadows. When he died, something in this country died with him. In Dealey Plaza that day, we didn't just lose a president. We lost possibility. We lost the future we could have had. And that's a grief I've carried for 57 years. Used to believe in the promise of America, not the version wrapped in flags and slogans, but the real dream. A government that served the people, that chose peace over endless wars. John F. Kennedy believed that too. That's what made him dangerous. The men who orchestrated his murder weren't patriots. They didn't care about national security. They cared about power, about protecting their empires, their money, their secrets. They killed a president to preserve a system that profits from war, fear, and silence. And they had the audacity to call it patriotism. But it was murder calculated. Cold-blooded murder disguised as loyalty to a nation. For over 50 years, I kept the truth locked away. Old photographs, classified documents, handwritten witness accounts, evidence that could have cracked the official story wide open. I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if I spoke up. Afraid of who might come after me. So I stayed quiet. Cowardly, maybe. But I survived. Now, as I lie in this hospice bed with cancer chewing through my insides, I realize survival means nothing if it comes at the cost of truth. I don't have much time left, but I have enough to do what I should have done decades ago. The most damning piece of evidence I have is a single frame from the original Zapruder film frame, 313. You've probably seen the version the government released. In it, Kennedy's head jerks backward from the fatal shot, but the background? Blurry, indistinct. Just noise, but the version I copied, before it was tampered with, before the corrections, it's different. In my frame, you can clearly see it, a puff of white smoke drifting up from behind the wooden fence on the grassy knoll. A muzzle flash. A second shooter. Undeniable proof that the official story, the Warren Commission's findings, was a lie. Lee, Harvey Oswald, might have pulled a trigger. Or maybe he didn't, but he damn sure wasn't alone. And anyone who says otherwise is either lying or too afraid to look deeper. The Commission? They failed us, whether out of incompetence or complicity, I can't say. But the result was the same. A carefully crafted lie passed off as history. And if they could lie about that ... what else have they lied about? How many wars were justified with half-truths? How many citizens have been watched, manipulated, silenced, all in the name of national security? We think we're free because we vote and shop and wave flags on the 4th of July. But real freedom died in Dallas, the day they put a bullet through the man who dared to challenge them. I remember Kennedy's vision. A country that could end the Cold War, walk on the moon, and secure civil rights not just for some, but for everyone. That vision died with him. What replaced it was a darker America. One that fights forever wars, spies on its own people, and serves corporations instead of citizens. The men who plotted his death weren't just stopping a man. They were killing an idea. An idea that government should serve the people, not hidden elites pulling strings behind the curtain. When his skull shattered, so did our democracy. Not all at once. It crumbled slowly, silently, like rot beneath paint. Still. I believe that idea can live again. That's why I'm speaking now. You can laugh. You can call me a conspiracy nut, a bitter old man doped up on morphine and regret. Maybe I am. But answer me this. Who benefited from Kennedy's death? Who kept their wars? Who expanded their budgets? Who gained control? Those answers tell the real story of November 22nd, 1963. I've made arrangements. When I'm gone, the evidence I've kept hidden will be released, scans, originals, all of it, through channels they can't touch or discredit. I know it won't rewrite history overnight. People have had almost 60 years to believe the lie. But for those who still care, for those who still want the truth, it'll be out there. Do what you will with it. As for me, I'm at peace. I'll die of cancer, not a mysterious heart attack or a staged suicide like so many others who got too close to the truth. Cancer is brutal, but at least it's honest. It doesn't pretend to be something else. Lately, I've been thinking about Kennedy's inaugural words. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. I believed I was doing that, serving in the shadows, guarding against threats. But the real threat wasn't out there, it was inside. Hiding in the Pentagon, in boardrooms, in the halls of power. The truth about Dallas isn't just about one gunshot. It's about the moment America lost its soul. When fear became policy. When secrecy replaced accountability. Kennedy wasn't perfect. God knows he had flaws. But he believed in something bigger than himself. The men who killed him only believed in keeping control. And in the smoke that rose from Dealey Plaza, they buried more than a president. They buried hope. But truth. It has a funny way of surviving, even when silenced, even when redacted and locked behind classified files. Maybe you'll read this and shrug. Maybe you'll go on believing the history books. But maybe, just maybe, you'll start to wonder. And that's enough for me. Because once the seed of doubt is planted, it never really dies. Not even in the dark. The full story, it's still waiting to be told. Somewhere, it lives on in the faded memories of aging witnesses, in the restless consciences of men who once played their part and chose silence. Scattered fragments of the truth are still out. There, buried deep, scattered like ash in the wind. Maybe someday, when every one of us who lived through those terrible days is gone, someone will finally put the pieces together. Maybe then, the entire scope of what really happened in Dallas will be revealed, and the American people will understand, truly understand, what was done in their name that November afternoon. Until that day comes, all I can offer is this: the confession of a dying man. A man who spent his life operating in the dark among secrets and shadows, and who, at the very end, chose to step into the light. I can't prove every detail. I don't have a courtroom's worth of evidence or a lineup of surviving witnesses. But I swear to you, on what's left of my soul, that every word I've shared is true, at least, as true as I know it to be. It was the third bullet, not the first, which missed, not the second, which hit his back. It was the third fired from the grassy knoll that ended everything. That snapped Kennedy's head violently back and to the left. That left no doubt. That single shot proved there was more than one shooter. It proved a conspiracy, a real one. Not the kind you laugh at over beers or dismiss with smirks. The kind that rewrites the future. That bullet didn't just kill a president. It killed something deeper. It killed the America we thought we lived in. The dream of justice, the belief that our leaders told us the truth, the faith that wrongs would be punished. That day in Dallas didn't just take John Fitzgerald Kennedy. It buried our trust beside him in Arlington National Cemetery. And we've been living in that shadow ever since. For 57 years, I carried this knowledge like a lead weight on my chest. And now I pass it to you. Do with it what you will. You might walk away. You might forget it by morning. But if you choose to listen really, Listen, then remember this. In a democracy, the truth doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the people. The moment it DOESN, single quotes T. The republic begins to rot. The smoke from Dealey Plaza has long since cleared. But the echoes of those gunshots, sharp, brutal, final, they still ring through history. If you pause and listen carefully, you can hear them. Even now, the sound of a republic dying, one secret at a time. That my name doesn't matter. Soon I'll be gone, just another name in a long list of men who died too old, too tired, or too afraid. Another casualty of time and illness. But the truth I've told you, that will live on. Because truth has a strange habit, it survives. It weathers storms, survives censorship, dodges bullets, and waits patiently beneath the lies piled on top. Of it, the man they murdered in Dallas was building something better. He wanted to end wars, dismantle the intelligence hydra we'd created, stop the greed-fueled machine before it devoured us all. He wasn't perfect, but he had vision, and they hated him for it. The very least we can do is try to understand why they stopped him, and maybe, just maybe, find the courage to finish what he started. Settle in now. Because the story doesn't end with Kennedy. It continues just beneath the surface, where the cornfields stretch quiet and endless, where the wind whispers and secrets sleep. Bzzz. The transmitter in the shed crackled to life, a soft hum. Rising through the quiet, Maddie Connors wiped a layer of dust from the old frequency panel, her fingers tracing lines like forgotten memories. The equipment was vintage, older than her, but it had belonged to her father, who once spent long, obsessive nights scanning frequencies for voices lost in the static. She hadn't touched it in years, not since he died. But tonight felt different, her 25th birthday. A night for reflection, for ghosts, and maybe for strange transmissions. "Come on, old friend," she murmured, turning the big tuning knob slowly. "Let's see if you've still got something to say." Outside the weathered shed, cornfields rustled in the wind. 40 acres of quiet land stretched in every direction, nothing but moonlight and shadow. Just enough to keep her father busy after Mom died. Just enough to keep Maddie stuck in Granger after her scholarship fell through. Now it was just her, the house, and the soft isolation of Iowa nights. The transmitter's needle jumped. Power surged. Static hissed. Maddie grabbed her phone, opened her FM radio app, and searched for a blank frequency. Out here, far from Des Moines, most of the dial was just dead air. Just how she liked it. She settled on 88.1 FM, adjusted the dials, and waited. The static changed, not all at once, but subtly. A faint rhythm emerged beneath the noise. A low, steady thump, almost like a heartbeat. But mechanical. Too precise. Too wrong. "That's weird," she muttered, leaning in. The transmitter wasn't supposed to receive signals. It was a broadcaster. Yet here it was, picking something up. The beat was joined by a high-pitched tone, delicate and glassy, weaving just above the thump. She knew that sound. Not exactly, but close. It reminded her of the pattern generators she built during her one-year stint in engineering at Iowa State. The harmonic intervals, the way the signal danced between frequencies, it was too clean to be random. She looked at her watch. 3:33 a.m. Maddie hit record on her phone and held it near the radio. For a full minute, the pattern pulsed, unwavering. Then silence. The static returned, flat and lifeless, as if nothing had ever happened. Back in her room, she transferred the recording to her laptop and opened her old audio software. She hadn't used it in years, but the tools came back like second nature. She ran a spectrogram analysis and watched as the frequencies painted. Across the screen, she froze. The visuals weren't random. The high tones formed distinct numerical patterns, prime numbers, then a Fibonacci sequence. Too deliberate, too mathematical. This wasn't weather interference. not radio bleed. And sure as hell not natural. This was intelligent. What the hell? I'll quote, she whispered. She ran the analysis again. Then again. By sunrise, she had 3 separate spectrograms and a set of converted numerical values that aligned with mathematical constants, astronomical data, and something else. Something she didn't understand yet. Something no one was meant to hear. She stood by the window as the cornfield swayed gently in the early morning wind. The world looked the same, but she knew with a cold certainty deep in her chest that everything had just changed. The truth doesn't always come in files or confessions. Sometimes it hums through forgotten radios. Sometimes it waits hidden in patterns, numbers, rhythms. Sometimes the truth whispers through the static and dares you to listen. Maddie had spent nearly 6 straight hours buried in Reddit threads, some geared toward audio engineers, others frequented by amateur astronomers. Her eyes were bloodshot from squinting at waveforms and decoding timestamps. Finally, she gave in and posted her findings with a simple caption: "Found weird signal on 88.1 FM in rural Iowa. Any ideas what this could be?" She included an audio clip and a rough analysis she'd scribbled together, something about the signal repeating in prime-numbered intervals. Then she collapsed into bed, skipping her usual morning chores. Her last thought before slipping into sleep was a reminder to herself: check the frequency again tomorrow night. When she woke around noon, groggy and disoriented, the first thing she did was check her Reddit post. Gone. Not downvoted. Not locked. Gone, like it had never been there. She double-checked. Her browser history showed she'd visited the site and uploaded the audio, but now there was no trace of it. Stranger still, when she opened her cloud drive to check the audio file, it was gone too. No deletion history, no archive, just gone. "Dad?" She called, descending the creaky stairs. Walter Connors was already in the kitchen, his weathered hands cupped around a chipped ceramic mug. 63 years old, with a face like an old leather boot, creased from decades of sun and wind, patience stitched deep into the corners of his eyes. He didn't look up from his newspaper. "Did you use my computer this morning?" "Didn't touch it," he said without looking up. "Why?" Maddie poured herself coffee, trying to steady her voice. "Some files disappeared. Stuff I recorded last night on your old radio setup." Walter's hand stopped halfway to his mouth. He stared at the mug, motionless. "What frequency?" His tone was too sharp, too deliberate. She blinked. 88.1. "Why?" Walter folded his newspaper slowly. A familiar move. He always did that when he was thinking, buying time. She'd seen it 100 times before. That old receiver picks up all kinds of junk. Probably just interference from the power lines. "Power line noise doesn't transmit prime number sequences, Dad," she replied. Silence fell over the kitchen. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock above the fridge. Walter cleared his throat. "Sometimes," he said, choosing each word carefully, "it's better not to broadcast what you hear, especially around here." "What's that supposed to mean?" Maddie asked, narrowing her eyes. He didn't answer. Just stood, rinsed out his mug, and stared out the kitchen window. "Some signals aren't meant to be shared," he muttered, then headed out the back door toward the fields. She watched him go, frustration prickling at the back of her neck. What the hell did he know about radio signals? That afternoon, Maddie grabbed her laptop and drove into town. The Granger Public Library was small, 2 rooms, 1 librarian, and patchy carpet that smelled like mildew, but it had Wi-Fi not linked to their home network. She uploaded the file again, this time to a more obscure forum focused on unexplained audio frequencies. Within an hour, responses started coming in. User, signal catcher _22, definitely artificial. Pattern repeats every 42.7 seconds exactly. Looks like SETI type formatting. User, Freck_junkie, where exactly did you record this? Then came a direct message. User, radio_silence_1977. Take this down immediately. They're watching this forum. 88.1 is part of Node 0. Not your discovery. Not the first time. Call the number in your area that ends in 333 if you want to understand why this matters. Maddie read the message twice. A cold chill spread down her spine despite the stifling summer heat. She started typing a response dot and then click. The library's internet dropped. Just like that, gone. A minute later, the librarian stood up behind her desk and announced that they were experiencing technical difficulties. Maddie didn't wait around. She closed her laptop and headed home. By the time she got back, her forum post was gone. Just like before. That evening, as the sun dipped behind golden rows of corn, Maddie sat on the edge of her bed, staring out the window. That's when she saw it. A white utility truck was parked just beyond the edge of their property, right where the field met the gravel road. Two men in matching gray uniforms stood beside it, facing the house. They didn't move. She couldn't make out their faces from this distance, but something about the way they stood, too still, too symmetrical, felt wrong. Like reflections instead of people. She blinked. They were gone. Truck and all. The road sat empty under the dusky sky. Later that night, exactly 3:33 a.m., Maddie sat alone in the equipment shed behind the house. Headphones on. Radio tuned to 88. 1 FM. The signal was back and stronger. Louder, sharper. Its strange, pulsing rhythm had changed. The mathematical sequences weren't just repeating, they were evolving, spiraling into increasingly complex patterns. She thought she heard something outside the corn. It rustled in time with the beat, like thousands of stalks moving in eerie synchronization with the signal. A kind of breathing. She didn't remember falling asleep, but she must have, because she awoke in her room with the sharp, familiar chime of her computer booting up. Her clock read 3:33 a. She hadn't set an alarm, rubbing her eyes. She watched as her screen flickered to life. A blank document opened on its own. Then, slowly, words began to appear typed by an unseen hand, not for you to hear. The cursor blinked once, twice, then the screen went black and the computer powered off. Maddie sat there frozen, heart pounding so loud she could feel it in her throat. She hadn't touched the keyboard, hadn't even been in the room. When morning came, she hoped the daylight would bring clarity. It didn't. While checking the fence line, she noticed something in the cornfield. At first, it looked like wind damage until she stepped closer. A perfect circle, maybe 10 feet across. The corn stalks were bent at precise angles, spiraling inward toward the center. Not broken, just pressed down, like something massive and invisible had pushed them with purpose. "Dad!" she shouted, spotting Walter inspecting the irrigation pump a few yards away. "You need to see this." He walked over slowly. His face didn't give anything away. Just stared at the formation. "Wind damage," he said, flatly. "Wind doesn't create perfect circles with mathematical precision," she replied. Walter didn't answer. He just looked out over the field, his jaw tight, eyes narrow. Something about his silence said more than words ever could. Maddie stepped forward, voice rising. "And you're telling me this just happens, right after I record that signal? Come on, Dad." Walter let out a long, weary sigh. "Leave it alone, Maddie, please." She threw up her arms, motioning to the flattened corn. "Why won't you tell me what you know? This," she gestured around them, "this isn't normal. And you're acting like it's just another Tuesday." Walter looked away, removed his cap, and ran a hand through the thinning gray hair at his temple. "I worked radar systems before I inherited this place," he said quietly. "Air Force, 85 to 91. Stationed up near the North Dakota border most of that time." Maddie already knew that he'd mentioned it in passing over the years, but the seriousness in his voice now made her lean in. There were frequencies, he said, eyes fixed on the circle in the cord. Signals we were trained to ignore. If they showed up on our equipment, we logged it as a malfunction. Didn't matter what we actually saw or heard. Why? She asked. They called them ambient anomalies, he said, as if the word still tasted strange. But among ourselves, we called them visitors. Maddie's breath caught in her throat. Are you saying you picked up UFOs? Walter shook his head slowly. I'm saying that some things out there speak in ways we're not supposed to understand. And when you try to speak back, when you respond, he turned and met her eyes. That's when the real trouble starts. Before she could ask more, the low hum of an approaching engine caught their ears. They both turned to see a white utility truck moving slowly down the gravel access road. Walter stiffened. Go inside, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Who are they? Maddie asked, her stomach turning. Don't know, he said, jaw tight. Don't want to, just go. Reluctantly, Maddie backed away toward the house, pausing just behind the kitchen window. From there, she watched the truck roll to a stop. At the end of the driveway, two men stepped out, identical in height, build, and posture. Their gray uniforms looked almost sterile, without logos or name tags. Even from a distance, their movements were oddly in sync, too smooth, too identical, like they were part of some choreographed routine. Walter walked out to meet them. They spoke for less than a minute. Walter nodded a few times, arms crossed. One of the men handed him what looked like a card. No shaking of hands, no smiles. Just quiet, robotic precision. Then they got back in the truck and left the way they came, disappearing down the dusty road. Walter came back inside, his expression unreadable. Electric company, he muttered before she could say anything. Checking lines, Maddie raised her eyebrows. In matching uniforms, with synchronized walks? Come on, Dad. Walter didn't argue. He just placed the card on the counter. It was blank, no logo, no name, just a phone number ending in 333. Sometimes, he said, voice low, it's better to ask permission than forgiveness. He didn't explain further. That afternoon, while Walter dozed in his chair, Maddie took the truck and headed to the Granger Historical Society, a modest, dusty backroom attached to the town hall. The air smelled like old paper and mothballs. A hunched, elderly woman behind the desk looked up in surprise. Can I help you, dear? I'm looking for any records, radio towers, emergency stations, anything that might have been set up around here, especially during the Cold War. The woman pressed her lips together, thoughtfully. That'd be the old emergency broadcast station, I suppose. Didn't do much broadcasting, not that I recall. Shut down in '97 or so. Do you know where it was? North of town, 8 miles maybe? Nothing left now but concrete and weeds, I'd imagine. With vague directions in hand, Maddie found the spot without much trouble, an overgrown clearing surrounded by trees where a weathered concrete slab lay cracked and half buried in thistles. The rusted remains of a tower mount jutted from the ground like a broken bone. But what caught her eye was the hatch, a heavy metal door embedded in the ground. It was sealed tight, but still intact. The paint was faded and scratched, but she could just make out the stenciled letters. Arcsnode 0. She took photos from every angle, especially the hatch. Back home, she began digging into a RC agricultural region communication system, supposedly built to warn rural areas of nuclear threats. But the deeper she searched, the more she found breadcrumbs hinting at something else. One declassified document mentioned passive monitoring and anomalous frequency detection. Another made brief reference to something called Node 0, but with most of the text redacted. Curious, she expanded her search to similar RX stations. That's when things turned weird. On satellite imagery, 6 decommissioned RX sites formed a perfect hexagon spanning across Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota. And right at the dead center, Granger. That night, again at exactly 3:33 a.m., the signal came back. Louder, clearer. But this time, embedded in the frequency's pattern was something unmistakable. Her name, encoded in binary, buried within the pulses and patterns. The signal knew her. As dawn crept in, she found a note under the front door. Do not transmit it. No signature. Just the warning. Later that morning, while checking the cattle, she noticed something strange. All the cows had gathered at the far end of the pasture, pressed together, heads low, backs to the cornfield. They refused to graze, even though the grass was thick and green. When she approached, they backed away, eyes wide and fearful. She'd never seen them act like that. By noon, the corn had changed again. What first looked like a subtle curve was now clearly spiral-shaped growth. Entire rows twisting clockwise, like they were responding to something underground. And when she looked closer, she realized the spirals matched the frequency graphs on her computer almost exactly. In a moment of impulse, she dialed the number on the blank card. A mechanical voice answered, first flat, emotionless, reciting what sounded like random numbers. 0, 9, 13, 21. Repeat. Then it cut off. She dialed again, this time a human voice answered, calm, cold, Connor's residence. 88.1. Observation. It wasn't a question. Maddie's stomach clenched. Who is this? How do you know that frequency? There was a long pause. Then the voice, dry and amused, replied, your frequency? It chuckled softly. It's been transmitting since 1941. You're just the newest receiver. The line had gone dead. When Walter came back from town with supplies, Maddie didn't wait. She met him on the porch, arms crossed, face pale. What's Node 0, Dad? She demanded. And what's really buried under that concrete slab north of town? Walter paused mid-step. His eyes dropped to the floorboards, and his shoulders slumped under a weight he clearly wasn't ready to carry. I signed papers, Maddie, he said quietly. We all did, every landowner since the 1940s. What kind of papers? Easement agreements, monitoring rights, government lingo. Said it was dormant. He waved vaguely toward the cornfields. Hasn't sent a readable signal in decades. Who said that? Walter hesitated. People who know enough to be afraid, he said, voice low, and smart enough not to interfere. That night, Maddie dreamed. In her dream, the corn swayed like a sea, waves rolling in slow rhythm, an unnatural tide drawn to some pulsing, unseen heartbeat. She walked barefoot into the field, drawn to the center of their land. There, the ground cracked open, not with soil and roots, but with something mechanical, something ancient. A massive, blinking eye stared up at her from the earth. Not dead, not sleeping. Watching. She woke with a gasp. Her bedroom was flooded in a strange, pale blue light, cool, quiet, and utterly directionless, as if it radiated from everywhere and nowhere at once. Her laptop screen was on, though she hadn't touched it. Abstract spectrogram patterns shimmered and twisted across the display, forming shapes that vanished before she could understand them. And then she saw them. Two figures stood in the far corner of her room. Identical silhouettes, the men from the utility truck. She hadn't heard the door open. She hadn't heard a sound at all. She's resonating now, one said. His voice didn't quite fit inside her ears, distorted, hollow, like a tape warping. Mid-playback. Becoming antenna, the other replied. Maddie lunged for the lamp. Her fingers fumbled against the switch, heart hammering. The light came on. The room was empty. Locals called it pressure front weather, that eerie stillness before a storm, when even the wind seems to hold its breath. But this wasn't normal. The clouds gathering over Granger that morning didn't look like rain. They looked like ink bleeding through the sky, swallowing sunlight. Maddie stepped onto the porch. Barn swallows flew low, erratic, and then vanished completely. No bird song. No buzzing insects. Just silence. Except the corn. The corn had grown taller overnight, at least 6 inches. Stalks didn't lean toward the sun anymore. They twisted inward, as if spiraling toward some invisible point buried beneath the property. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number lit the screen. The pattern completes today. Stay indoors after sunset. She tried replying, but the message bounced back. UNDELIVERABLE. Walter had left before sunrise, headed to a farm supply auction in Des Moines. She was alone, and the farm, her home, no longer felt familiar. It felt foreign, like the land itself had changed alliances. Maddie needed answers. She drove into town, knuckles white on the wheel. The Granger Public Library's local history section was barely a nook, tucked behind a shelf of romance novels. But it had archives, yellowed newspapers, typewritten reports from a slower time. She asked about the emergency broadcast station just north of town. Funny you ask, the librarian said, ducking behind the counter. Someone else was digging into those old stations last month. Left this behind. She handed over a thick, dusty folder. Inside were photocopied articles about the station's construction in 1941. Clipped among them were handwritten notes in Cyrillic. A faded black and white photo slipped loose from the pages. 7 men in military uniforms stood before the half-built tower, hands behind their backs, faces stern. On the back, someone had scrawled in pencil, Joint Monitoring Initiative, USUSR. April 1941, Maddie's brow furrowed. That's impossible, she whispered. America and the Soviet Union weren't allies until after Pearl Harbor, December 1941. This photo was dated 8 months before that. A folded diagram slid out from between the pages. It showed the radio tower's foundations, but they went far deeper than any tower needed. The lines connected to something beneath the earth. A labeled schematic read, receiving configuration, subterranean frequency capture. As she snapped photos with her phone, her fingers brushed a thick envelope, sealed and tucked into the folder's back pocket. She peeled it open and carefully unfolded the brittle paper inside. It was a letter, handwritten and dated August 15, 1982. To whoever finds this account, my name is Alexei Baranov, formerly Captain, Soviet Air Defense Forces. Your government calls me a defector, but I did not leave for politics or ideology. I left because both our nations lie about what sleeps beneath. Your American heartland. In 1982, I was assigned to a joint project, officially atmospheric research. In truth, we were monitoring signals from an object discovered in 1926. American farmers uncovered it after what was believed to be a meteorite impact, but it was no meteor. The object was manufactured, buried deeper than any crater should go. Neither government wanted it public, so they built a network of listening stations, disguised as rural broadcast towers, 6 in total, arranged to triangulate. Granger was the center. For decades, the object barely pulsed, like a heartbeat in hibernation. But now the pulse is changing, evolving. The pattern grows more complex. The object is waking. It no longer sends signals just to us. It is reaching beyond to the stars. When the pattern completes, it will connect. And whatever's been sleeping, whatever it is we've been listening to, will no longer be alone. Alexei Baranov, I fear what might answer. The final line of the letter sent a chill crawling down Maddie's spine. Her hands shook as she folded the brittle page and tucked it back into the envelope. The date, August 15, 1982, lined up with her father's early years in the Air Force. Had he known all this time? Had he lied to her? She stepped outside the library. The sky had turned a copper-green hue, like the breath before a tornado. But the air was unnervingly still. Not a single leaf moved. Her phone flashed no service. The streets were nearly empty, the town hollowed out. It felt like something had scared everyone off, something invisible but undeniable. As she drove home, things only got stranger. The cornfields flanking the highway had changed. The rows that had stretched straight and tidy just that morning now curled inward into intricate spirals, sweeping across entire acres. From the ground, the patterns created disorienting illusions. The landscape seemed to breathe slow and deliberate, as if the earth itself had become aware of her dot at the edge of her driveway. The utility truck was back. The two men stood beside it, motionless, waiting. Maddie didn't flinch this time. She pulled up, parked directly in front of them, and stepped out of the car. "Who are you really?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "What's happening to our farm?" They stared at her, expressionless, not cold, just empty. Up close, their resemblance was uncanny. Not just similar builds or matching uniforms. Their faces were nearly identical. Eyes that didn't blink, skin too smooth. Even their stillness felt artificial, like mannequins animated by something that didn't fully understand motion. "Resonance testing," one said, voice flat. "Calibration complete," said the other. "That doesn't mean anything to me," Maddie snapped. "What's underneath our land? What is Arcs Node 0? The first man tilted his head slightly, as though considering how much to say. "Not what," he corrected. "Who?" "It was always listening," the second added. "Now it's answering." "Answering what?" The first man blinked, just once. The question it was sent to ask. They handed her a card. It was blank, except for a small set of printed geographic coordinates. Without another word, they turned, got into the truck and drove away. Maddie stared after them for a long moment. Then she opened her phone and typed the coordinates into the map app. Her breath caught. They pointed to the exact center of their farm, the spot where the spirals converged. The section her dad always avoided. A sunken patch of land that flooded too easily. He'd always claimed the soil there was poor, unfit for planting, but he'd known. He must have known Dot by the time she reached the house. The sun had dipped. Low behind the trees, the corn twisted like writhing fingers in the golden light. She grabbed a flashlight and walked out toward the center, her boots crunching over dry leaves and disturbed soil. The depression was deeper than she remembered. The soil was no longer just damp, it shimmered, almost metallic. She crouched near the center, watching as the ground began to pulse with a soft blue glow, faint at first, then steadier. It beat in rhythm, like a mechanical heartbeat. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from her dad. "Don't go near the center field. Coming. Home now. Too late." Maddie was already there. She stepped closer as the ground trembled beneath her. A small section of soil gave way, collapsing into itself and revealing something solid beneath, smooth, metallic, with etched lines and curves that resembled math symbols or circuitry. Her phone rang. "Unknown caller." She answered. "Matilda Connors," said a voice, calm, precise. It was the same man who had spoken to her before. "You need to leave immediately. The pattern completes at 3:33. "What happens at 3:33? She asked, eyes locked on the glowing surface. "It finishes constructing the receiver. And then it waits for instructions." "From who?" A pause. "We don't know," the voice said quietly. "That's what scares." Wes. The ground shivered again. Maddie stumbled backward as more earth collapsed, revealing more of the hidden structure beneath. It was massive, a disk, maybe 30 feet across, its entire surface engraved with symbols that shifted in real time, rearranging like a Rubik's Cube of language. The glow intensified. Her phone flickered, then showed a new message. Coordinates matched. Receiver identified. As darkness settled, Maddie looked up. The stars, they were disappearing, not hidden by clouds, gone, one by one, erased from the sky as if someone were deleting them. In their place, faint lines began to appear, forming the same spiral she'd seen on her computer. SPECTROGRAM. At 3:33 a.m. It happened. Every device on the farm turned on at once. Her phone, her laptop, the old shortwave radio in the shed, even. Lights in rooms she hadn't entered. All of them emitted the same low, vibrating pulse. She felt it in her chest, in her bones. The center of the depression split open. The soil peeled back in 6 symmetrical slices like petals on a flower, revealing the full disk below. Its surface shimmered with colorless light. Then, from its center, a beam shot upward, clean, coherent, and endless. It pierced the night sky where the stars had vanished. The transmission had begun. Behind her, tires screeched to a stop. Her father's truck skidded into the driveway. Walter leapt out, shouting her name as he ran toward the field, flashlight in hand. "Maddie! Get back to the house!" His voice cracked. "It's not safe." She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her body felt like it was part of the signal, locked in the same rhythm. He reached her side, grabbing her shoulders. "What is it, Dad?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What is this, really?" Walter looked at her, his face pale in the glow of the beam. "They called it a beacon," he said. "When I was stationed at the facility, they told us it was dormant, been that way for thousands of years, until something lightning maybe partially reactivated it in 1926. Maddie looked back toward the beam. "And now?" Walter's voice dropped. "Now it's awake. They built the listening post to observe it, whatever it was, without getting too close, without disturbing the phenomenon any further. They began as a group of American and Soviet scientists during a rare moment of cooperation before the Cold War froze everything over. Over the years, others joined: military officials, classified personnel, scientists from countries with no names on the official documents. All of them understood the same chilling truth. This wasn't just a signal. It was something deeper, stranger. Something they weren't meant to hear. The humming had returned, louder this time, vibrating through the bones. A strange light emerged first. A narrow beam, then a widening column. It stretched into the sky like a glowing cylinder, and everything inside it looked wrong, warped. The air inside shimmered, twisted, as though space itself was folding. Straight lines bent. Angles became curves. Trees inside the light bent inwards, like they were being pulled into a spiral that had no center. Walter's voice broke through the noise. "We need to go. Now." He grabbed her arm with urgency. "They're evacuating the entire zone tonight." She didn't argue. "Not anymore. I'll be your guide tonight," James said, his voice calm but steady, layered over the static of old film grain. Into one of the most chilling, unsolved mysteries of the Cold War era. He leaned closer into the mic. "Picture this, a bitter winter night. The Ural Mountains. It's 1959. A group of young adventurers huddled together inside a canvas tent on a slope known to the locals as Dead Mountain. There's laughter, the scratch of pens and journals, the soft flicker of a flashlight. Plans are being made for the next day's hike. None of them know they're already living their last night on Earth. This," James continued, "is the true story of the Dyatlov Pass incident." He glanced at his cluttered desk, scattered photos, declassified documents, field maps marked in red. "I've spent weeks digging through case files, reading journals, listening to old Soviet recordings. The more I uncover, the less it feels like history, and more like a waking nightmare. It all began in late January 1959, 10 experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnical Institute set off on a challenging expedition deep into the mountains. All of them were young early 20s, full of energy, laughter, and a kind of stubborn idealism. 7 men, 2 women, and 1 older instructor. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student. On January 23rd, they received their route papers and boarded a train in Sverdlovsk, now known as Yekaterinburg. You can imagine the mood. Someone strumming a mandolin, others singing along. Cold breath steaming in the cabin, spirits high. A Kind of joy only felt by people who don't yet believe anything can truly go wrong. After 2 long days on the train, they arrived at Ivdel, a remote outpost town that once served as a Soviet gulag. From there, they hopped onto a bus, then crammed into the back of a woodcutter's truck, which bounced and creaked through icy back roads until they reached Vitsai, the last inhabited village before the vast, frozen wilderness the locals in. Vitsai must have looked at them with a quiet mix of admiration and dread. These weren't amateurs, but still February was the harshest time of year, and their route was labeled as a Category 3, the most difficult. On January 27th, the group departed Vitsai and began their trek into the snow-covered unknown. One of them, Yuri Yudin, was in pain. He had long struggled with rheumatism and a congenital spinal condition that flared up in the cold. On January 28th, just a day in, Yuri's joints seized up. The pain became unbearable. "I can't go on," he admitted, frustrated and ashamed. Igor rested a hand on his shoulder. "Then you go back. Don't push it, Yuri. We'll be okay." Reluctantly, Yuri turned back, never knowing that by stepping away, he was saving his life. He would become the expedition's sole survivor, the last man standing, the one left to tell the story. The remaining 9 hikers pressed forward, unaware of what was coming. Their recovered journals and photographs later helped investigators reconstruct the route. By January 31st, they reached the edge of a highland plateau. There, in a wooded valley, they stored surplus gear and food supplies meant for their return journey. Spirits were still high. They joked, snapped photos, and even put together a satirical newsletter they titled The Evening o' Torton. In one playful entry, someone wrote, "From now on, we know that the snowmen exist." It was probably a tongue-in-cheek reference to the Yeti legends that hovered around these peaks, but despite their light mood, the landscape around them was growing colder, darker, more hostile. February 1st, the team set out to cross a mountain pass, the one that would later be named after Dyatlov himself. The goal was to make camp beyond the ridge, but the weather turned fast. Winds roared in, whiteout snow blurred their path. Visibility fell to 0. In the chaos, they veered off-course westward onto the slopes of a mountain known in the native Mansi language as Kolatsiakal, Mountain of the Dead. By the time they realized their mistake, it was late. Exhausted, disoriented, and without any real cover, Igor made a decision. "We camp here." Why? No one knows for sure. Some speculate he didn't want to lose elevation. Others think he wanted to prove they could handle extreme conditions, even an exposed slope during a storm, and so they did. They chopped out a flat spot on the icy slope, pitched their tent, and settled in for the night. A decision that decades later would be endlessly dissected. That night, February 1st, 1959, was brutal. The temperature dropped to -20 degrees Celsius. Winds howled through the pass like banshees. But inside the tent, they had warmth. Forensic evidence suggests they had dinner around 6:30 p.m. They were still alive. Still hopeful. One of the last photos ever taken showed the group laughing in the twilight, bundled in layers, their tent rising behind them like a small beacon of defiance in the growing storm. None of them knew it would be their last. Photograph. And somewhere far above or deep below, something was watching, despite the brutal cold and the wind howling. Like wolves outside, the group inside the tent seemed in good spirits that night. They wrote in their journals, shared jokes, and made plans for the next day. There was no fear, only fatigue, maybe, and the comforting sense of routine. But something happened in the dead of night, something so sudden and terrifying, it shattered the calm completely. We'll never know exactly what. No one survived to tell the story. But the evidence left behind tells a tale more disturbing than any fiction. Sometime after midnight on February 2nd, the canvas of the tent was slashed open from the inside, not unzipped, not torn by an animal. Cut, as if someone inside had panicked and needed out fast. All 9 hikers bolted into the freezing night, leaving behind almost everything. Boots, jackets, sleeping bags, even flashlights and tools. It was minus 30 degrees Celsius outside. That's minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Imagine being barefoot in that cold, in the middle of a snowstorm. In total darkness. Whatever made them flee like that must have been immediate and overwhelming, something they feared more than the cold, more than death itself. And that's the question that's haunted investigators for over 60 years. What scared them so badly that they ran out into the blizzard half naked? When the group didn't return to Versailles by their planned date of February 12th, no one panicked at first. Delays were common in the mountains, but days passed. Then weeks. Families began to worry. By February 20th, the hikers' relatives demanded answers. The Ural Polytechnical Institute organized a search, first with student volunteers, and soon, Soviet Army joined in. Planes and helicopters were dispatched, sweeping over vast snow-covered terrain. Conditions were brutal. Visibility was often poor, and temperatures kept searchers on edge. Among the volunteer searchers was a student named Mikhail Sharavin. On February 26th, his team was scanning the slopes of Kolatsiakal when something caught his eye, just a small corner of fabric poking through the snow. As they approached, they realized it was the missing group's tent collapsed, half buried and eerily still. Sharavin hacked at the snow with an ice axe, clearing the entrance. What he found inside chilled him to the core. The tent had been slashed open from within. Snow had filled much of the interior, but nothing seemed looted or chaotic. Their belongings were laid out neatly, boots in a row, folded coats, axes, and flashlights at the edges. A small stack of rubles, maps, personal notebooks. Even a flask of vodka and a plate with slices of salo pork fat sat, untouched in one corner. It was like time had stopped. As if the group had been in the middle of a quiet evening and something tore that moment apart. Sharavin later said, "It felt like they were interrupted, like someone or something cut their evening in half and they just ran." Outside the tent, searchers found tracks. 9 sets, not running, not scattered, but walking in a strangely calm single-file path. Down the slope. Some were barefoot, others were only socks or a single boot. You could see individual toe marks frozen into the snow, and yet they hadn't panicked. The tracks were clear and deliberate, as if they had decided together to leave the only shelter they had. The trail led about 500 meters downhill toward the forest before fresh snowfall erased the rest. The rescuers followed it, unsettled by what they were seeing. Why walk into a snowstorm half-dressed? What had frightened or compelled them to move that way? By the time darkness fell on February 26th, they had to halt the search, the mystery, gnawing at their thoughts. The next morning, searchers expanded their efforts toward the forest. At the edge of the trees, beneath a towering Siberian cedar, they found what remained of a small fire and the first 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Yuri Krivonishenko, were lying side by side in the snow. Neither had shoes. They were stripped to their underwear, their bodies stiff and contorted in death. The cedar's lower branches were broken, snapped off up to 5 meters high. Bits of torn flesh and clothing clung to the bark. Someone had tried to climb that tree, whether to get a view of the tent or to escape something chasing them. It was impossible to say. But the image was horrifying. Doroshenko's body had severe burns. Krivonishenko's right hand was missing a piece of flesh, as if he'd bitten it off in pain or desperation. There were no signs of fire where his burns occurred. No explanation for the injuries. Nothing that made sense. It was only the beginning. He had bitten clean through a chunk of his own knuckle, maybe to stop himself from screaming, or to keep from passing out in the bitter cold. Both his and the other man's hands and feet were dark, almost reddish-brown frostbite had taken over. The branches of the cedar tree above them had been stripped clean for firewood, but the small fire they built had long since burned out by the time they died. The scene haunts me. 2 young men, stripped to their underwear, huddled close under. A sky black and endless, surrounded by snow, clinging to the last of their warmth until it was gone. Roughly 300 meters uphill from that tree, closer to where the tent had been, the search team found the body of Igor Dialov. He was lying on his back, his head pointed toward the tent, like he'd been trying to crawl back to it. He was better dressed than the 2 under the cedar, a flannel shirt, a sweater, pants. But he had no boots, just socks soaked and stiff. With cold, one of his arms was frozen upright as if reaching toward the sky, fingers clutched tight around a small birch branch. His other hand was pressed flat against his chest. Some of the rescuers thought he might have been protecting something close to his heart, a photograph, maybe, or a notebook, but nothing was found. When they brushed the snow from his face, his eyes were open. His expression was strangely peaceful. Not far from Igor, they found Zina Komogorova, a 22-year-old student. She too was facing the tent, her arms bent at the elbows, stretched out in front of her as if she had been crawling, dragging herself up the slope, trying to get back before the cold finished her. She was dressed in 2 sweaters and 2 pairs of pants, but like Igor, no boots, only socks on her feet. On her right side, running down her torso, was a long dark red bruise. The pattern looked like she'd been struck hard, maybe by a baton or the butt of a rifle. It was a strange injury, especially because she didn't have any other major wounds. Just that one deep, unexplained mark dot. It wasn't until March 5th, days later, that they found the 5th body, Rustam Slobodin. He was 23. He lay face down in the snow, about 480 meters from the cedar tree, halfway back toward the tent. Of the 5 bodies found first, he was the most warmly dressed. A long-sleeve undershirt, a sweater, 2 pairs of pants, 4 pairs of socks, and 1 felt-lined boot, just 1, on his right foot. His left foot had only a sock. His head was bare. In his right hand, he gripped a small folding knife closed. The autopsy later revealed a fracture on his skull, about 18 centimeters long. It looked like a blow to the head, hard, but not immediately fatal. The coroner believed he could have kept moving, even with that injury, for at least an hour. He'd fought to live, just like the others. In the end, like Dyatlov, Zina, and the 2 under the tree, Rustam died of hypothermia. No fatal external wounds. Just cold, relentless cold. The glass face of Rustam's wristwatch was shattered. It had stopped at 8:45. No one could say whether that was morning or night, or even what day it had frozen at. It was like time itself had just stopped. Imagine being Yuri Yudin, the one member of the group who turned back early, who lived. He was asked to identify the bodies as they were airlifted out, one by one. 5 friends, 5 faces he had known, and yet 4 were still missing. Weeks passed. Snow began to melt as spring crept in. And on May 4th, almost 3 months after it all began, a Mansi tribesman named Kurin was helping in the search with his dog when the animal picked up a scent near a rocky ravine, deeper in the woods beyond the cedar, about 75 meters further. Into the forest and 1.5 kilometers from the tent, in a ravine filled with old snow, the search team found scraps of clothing snagged on a branch. When they started digging, they found the rest. Buried beneath nearly 4 meters of snow were the final 4 members: Ludmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, and Nikolai Thibault-Brigno. Unlike the others, 3 of these 4 were wearing more layers. It looked like they had taken clothing from their dead friends, likely an act of desperate survival. Ludmila had on Krevashenko's torn, burned trousers. Her foot was wrapped in a piece of his sweater. Zolotaryov, 38, wore Dubinina's faux fur coat and hat. Kolevatov had pulled on an extra sweater and pants, probably from another member of the group. It was grim, but human and instinctive attempt to survive in a place that had turned deadly. But what they found next only made the story darker. These four didn't just freeze. They had suffered catastrophic injuries. Fatal ones. And no one could explain how. The injuries were beyond horrific. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had suffered a devastating skull fracture. His head was literally crushed. The crack measured close to 8 inches, stretching across the side of his skull. For Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov, it was even worse. Their chests had been crushed inward, their ribs shattered. Lyudmila had 10 ribs broken, 5 on each side. Semyon had 5 ribs fractured on one side. The forensic pathologist examining the bodies said the force needed to cause such injuries would have been extreme, comparable to the impact of a high-speed car crash. But what made it even more unsettling was the lack of external trauma. No cuts, no bruises, no broken skin. It was as if something had applied a massive, concentrated pressure, like a shockwave or a heavy weight, without touching the surface. As if the damage had come from the inside out. Alexander Kolevatov, the 4th body found in the ravine, had less catastrophic injuries, but his condition still raised questions. He had a broken nose, an open wound behind his ear, and a strange deformity in his neck, though it was unclear if this had occurred before or after death. The likely cause was still hypothermia, but possibly following head or neck trauma. And then came the gruesome details that turned the Dyatlov case from tragedy into nightmare. All 4 ravine victims had unusual soft tissue damage to the face, and head damage that wasn't present on any of the other bodies. Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, part of her lips, and even a piece of bone from her upper jaw. Semyon Zolotaryov had no eyes. Alexander Kolevatov was missing his eyebrows. These injuries shocked the investigators and the public when they became known. Whispers began. Had they been attacked? Had someone or something ripped out their eyes and tongue? Theories exploded. Across the Soviet Union and beyond, military experiments gone wrong, a secret weapon test, even supernatural creatures. But forensic experts gave a less sensational explanation. The 4 bodies had been lying in a stream, partially submerged. For months. Water can be cruel. Scavenging animals, rodents, birds often target soft tissues like eyes and lips. Over 3 months, the faces had likely been eroded by flowing water and wildlife. Not violence, still. One fact couldn't be ignored. Lyudmila's stomach contained around 100 grams of coagulated blood. That meant her heart had still been beating. When her tongue was removed, or at least when the bleeding started, this suggested that the injury, or whatever caused it, happened very shortly before or right after death. Perhaps she was barely alive when her face was exposed to the elements, or perhaps something more sinister happened. Adding to the mystery was the detail that Zolotaryov had a camera slung around his neck, one not found with the other cameras. Recovered from the tent, in his hand was a pen and notebook. It looked like he had tried to write something, but the page was blank, whatever he wanted to say. He never got the chance. The investigators in 1959 were left without clear answers. As a procedural step, a criminal investigation was opened. With the kind of injuries found, it couldn't be ruled out that someone had attacked the group. The first suspicion fell on the native Mansi people reindeer herders who lived in the area. Perhaps, the theory went, the hikers had wandered into sacred land, but that idea didn't hold up. No signs of a struggle were found. No other footprints. The only tracks around the scene were from the hikers themselves, and the Mansi had actually helped in the search. They had no history of violence toward outsiders. Next came the theory of an avalanche. It was a natural idea, sudden snow, a collapsing slope, crushing injuries. But again, the evidence didn't quite fit. The tent had not been buried, and the footprint trail leading from it was clear and undisturbed. Avalanches tend to obliterate everything in their path. This one, if it had happened, seemed too selective. Some thought of wild animals, but that didn't fit either. No claw marks, no tooth punctures, and no animal tracks in the snow. Eventually, the Soviet authorities came to an unsettling conclusion. No other humans were involved. A senior doctor on the case even stated that the pressure which crushed Dubinina's chest and shattered Zolotaryev's ribs was beyond what any human could inflict, not with bare hands, not without tools. And there were no tools. Then came another strange twist, one that added a Cold War flavor to the case. When some of the hikers' clothing was tested, it was found to be radioactive. Specifically, Ludmila's brown sweater and Yuri Krivonishenko's wool pants showed elevated levels of radiation levels far beyond what one would expect on a camping trip. The radiation wasn't something you'd notice unless you were looking for it. But one of the lead investigators had access to a Geiger counter, and he used it out of curiosity. What he found sparked a firestorm. Suddenly, theories about secret military experiments, radioactive weapons, and government cover-ups gained momentum. Why was radioactive clothing found in the middle of the Ural Mountains? As it turned out, the explanation may have been less mysterious. Yuri Krivonishenko had previously worked at the Mayak nuclear plant, site of the 1957 Kishtim disaster, one of the worst nuclear accidents in history. He had helped clean up radioactive contamination there. It's very likely that some of his gear, especially clothing reused on expeditions, still carried trace contamination. Likewise, Alexander Kolevatov had been a student of nuclear physics. He studied at a classified institute in Moscow and had access to radioactive materials. Contaminated clothes might not have seemed dangerous in that context, but they confused investigators later. In short, the radiation could have been a red herring, an odd but explainable detail that had nothing to do with the hikers' deaths. Still, when added to the bizarre injuries, the unexplained behavior, and the terrifying setting, it turned an already tragic story into a chilling enigma. A group of young, bright students had died in a way no one could understand, in a frozen wilderness where even time seemed to stop and the world would never look at the Ural Mountains the same way again. They had deep tans, and some of their hair had turned gray. When their relatives first saw the bodies, the condition only deepened the growing whispers of nuclear exposure or some kind of chemical contamination. Authorities were quick to explain it away. They said the darkened skin was simply the result of natural mummification, weeks lying in the freezing cold, and sun had caused the skin to dry and tan. As for the hair turning gray, they claimed it could happen due to prolonged exposure to the elements, or possibly even from the embalming process. But for grieving families in 1959, that explanation didn't sit right. Tan skin, discolored hair, traces of radiation on clothing. It all sounded too close to science fiction, or worse, a government cover-up. By May of that year, the official investigation was winding down with no clear answers. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, was under immense pressure from higher-ups to conclude the case quickly. In his final report, he wrote that the hikers had died as a result of an unknown compelling force. That phrase, strange and frustrating, was just a polite way of saying, we don't know. No one could be held responsible. No suspects. No causes, just something unexplained. The files were quietly stamped secret and tucked away in the Soviet archives. The Dyatlov Pass area was then declared off-limits to all expeditions for the next 3 years. Officially, this was to prevent further tragedies. Unofficially, many believe it was a calculated move to keep curious minds and foreign journalists away from something the authorities didn't want uncovered. The phrase compelling natural force raised more questions than it answered. Imagine the silence that followed. 9 young, vibrant lives lost, and their families were told they'd never truly know how or why. In the Soviet Union of 1959, that was the end of it. Some of the family sensed the truth was being hidden from them. Zina Kolmogorova's mother, for instance, and the parents of Igor Dyatlov himself, they all received vague but chilling warnings from officials. You will never know the truth, they were told, so stop asking questions. Back then, if the party or the KGB told you to stay quiet, you stayed quiet. Not out of agreement, but out of fear. So they buried their children without closure. The Dyatlov incident slowly slipped into Cold War legend, a ghost story whispered in mountain cabins and classrooms in the Urals. As for Yuri Yudin, the only one of the group who turned back early and survived, he carried the weight of that survival for the rest of his life. Survivor's guilt haunted him like a shadow. He couldn't let go of the feeling that something wasn't right. This wasn't a natural accident, he'd say in later interviews. I know my friends. I know how prepared they were. Something else happened. Until his death in 2013, Yudin insisted that the Soviet authorities were hiding something. Just before he passed, he gave a public interview where he claimed he believed the group had been forced out of their tent at gunpoint. He went even further, suggesting that Ludmila Dubinina's tongue had been cut out, not by animals, but by human hands, because she had been outspoken and brave. These were not random deaths, he said quietly. They were silenced. But he admitted he had no proof, just decades of thinking and the gut feeling that never went away. Whether his suspicions were right or not, Yudin's perspective shows just how deeply a mystery can root itself in someone's soul. And so here we are decades later with more questions than answers. I'm a modern-day investigator, combing through brittle Soviet files, reading testimonies yellowed by time, cross-referencing official reports with half-forgotten whispers. As I study this case, I can almost feel the chill of the Ural wind slipping through the pages. The Dyatlov Pass case remains one of the world's most baffling unsolved mysteries. It lingers precisely because it stands on the edge where the rational ends and the inexplicable begins. Over the years, countless theories have been offered. Some grounded in science, others drenched in paranoia or the supernatural. We'll examine each of them, each branching theory like a path through the snow, testing them against the hard evidence: the ripped open tent, the lack of proper clothing, the brutal injuries, the radiation, the strange lights in the sky, and the iron curtain of secrecy that followed. Let's start with the simplest path, the one the Russian government eventually settled on: an avalanche. This explanation appeals to logic. Imagine the group, fast asleep inside their tent, pitched on a snowy slope. Then, sometime in the dead of night, a slab of compacted snow from above breaks loose. It doesn't have to be a massive avalanche, just enough weight and speed to crush part of the tent. The fabric begins to collapse. The sound, the sudden pressure, it all happens in seconds. Panic sets in. They believe a larger avalanche is about to engulf them. With no time to lose, someone grabs a knife and slashes the tent from the inside. The entrance might be buried or jammed shut. One by one, they flee into the darkness with barely any clothing, focused only on getting to safer ground. In this light, their behavior no longer seems bizarre, it seems like survival instinct. This theory gained traction again in 2019, when the Russian authorities reopened the case. In 2020, they officially concluded that a slab avalanche had caused the deaths. Around the same time, a group of scientists used computer simulations and modern physics models to demonstrate how such a slide could occur. Even on the gentle slope of Kolatsyakal, they showed how a delayed snow slab could slide silently and powerfully enough to damage the tent without leaving obvious traces. Under this theory, everything that followed, the disorganized escape, the half-dressed bodies, the brutal injuries, can be seen through the lens of people trying to survive in extreme cold after a traumatic, disorienting event. Still, there are holes in the avalanche theory. The tent was found mostly intact. The footprints were deliberate, not panicked. The bodies were scattered across different areas, some hidden under snow for months. And those internal injuries, broken ribs, crushed skulls, seemed more like the result of blunt trauma than snow pressure. And then there's the radiation. The strange orange skin, the secrecy, the silence. So while the avalanche theory may be the most convenient explanation, it doesn't fit all the facts neatly. Like the mountain itself, this mystery holds its secrets close, half buried under snow, half whispered through history. The way the Dyatlov group responded, once you accept the possibility of an avalanche, makes perfect sense. Textbook survival behavior, really. The theory goes like this. A slab of snow, possibly loosened by wind or the residual heat from the stove earlier that evening, suddenly shifted and slid down onto the tent. Loud cracks and rumbles would have erupted across the slope, terrifying. In the stillness of night, the hikers, all experienced and trained, didn't wait to find out if a full avalanche was coming. They reacted with practiced urgency. Someone grabbed a knife and cut their way out of the tent. If snow had pressed against the entrance, they wouldn't have had time to dig their way out. They had to move fast. There was no time to put on boots or grab coats. In just socks and light indoor clothes, they ran. They headed downslope, aiming for the tree line about a mile away, terrain far enough from the path of any follow-up slide. And when you imagine it through their eyes, their choices seem less bizarre. Every second mattered. They weren't panicking, they were focused on survival. Once they reached the trees, they tried to regroup. They found evidence of this by the cedar tree. A fire had been built, most likely in a desperate attempt to stay warm. A pair of bodies was found nearby, hands burned, probably from trying to get as close as possible to the flames. And deeper into the forest, they attempted another strategy. Some of them dug a snow shelter, a cave carved into the ravine's slope, with tree branches laid out on the floor. That's where the last 4 hikers were found. They were better dressed, suggesting they had returned to the tent and recovered some clothing, or that their companions had shared garments with them before dying. All of this, the movement, the attempts to build fire and shelter points, not to madness or chaos, but to rational decisions made in a terrible, life-threatening situation. Now, shifting gears for a moment. Hello there, fellow truth seekers. Before we dive into tonight's chilling tale, I hope you're having a peaceful evening or morning, or whatever time it is in your corner of the world. Whether you're sipping coffee in New York, unwinding with chai in Mumbai, or deep into the night in Tokyo, it's kind of incredible how this community spans the entire planet. We're connected by more than time zones. We're united by the need to ask questions, to peer into shadows, to understand the unexplained. Tell me, where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. I read them all. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. Join a growing group of curious minds who aren't afraid to follow the trails most ignored. Now, get comfortable, because tonight we're heading to one of the most remote and mysterious mountains in the world. Mount Hayes, Alaska. What you're about to hear are the recovered field notes of Dr. Sarah Chun, a veteran geophysicist who thought she was just studying a mountain, until she realized the mountain was studying her. Field notes. Mount Hayes Geological Survey Classification. Redacted. Entry 1 March 5, 10th, 2024. Day 1. The job offer. I should have known something was off when they offered me 3 times my normal rate. My name is Dr. Sarah Chun. I've been working as a contract geophysicist for over 2 decades. I map underground structures, analyze seismic activity, and help oil companies find whatever they're drilling for in impossible places. I've worked in the North Sea, the Sahara, the Canadian Shield. But never have I been offered a job quite like this one. The call came on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was in Montana, reviewing core samples for an oil exploration project. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but with a strange urgency. Dr. Chun, this is Marcus Halle with Meridian Aerospace Solutions. We have a project that requires your expertise in remote geological analysis. Meridian Aerospace, I'd heard of them, but only in passing. Whispers in the field, no website, no public address. A private contractor with deep government ties. The kind of company people said could launch satellites, make them vanish, and never leave a paper trail. What's the location? I asked, already closing my laptop and reaching for my travel gear. My bank account was in bad shape, and instinct told me this was going to be big money. Mount Hayes, Eastern Alaska Range. We need a full geological survey of the summit and surrounding. Structures within a 15-mile radius. Mount Hayes. The name triggered something. A foggy memory I couldn't place. Like a dream that evaporates as soon as you try to recall it. I couldn't explain the feeling, only that it left me deeply uneasy. When do you need me there? Tomorrow. The offer was $60,000 for a 2-week survey, plus expenses, plus a completion bonus that would wipe out the last of my student loans. I didn't ask enough questions. I should have wondered why they were in such a hurry, why they were paying so much for work that seemed routine. But I said yes, packed my seismic sensors and thermal imaging gear, and caught the next flight to Fairbanks. Entry to March 16th, 2024, Day 2, into the ice. First real sign that this wasn't a normal assignment came during the helicopter ride to the outpost. Our pilot, Joe Reeves, was a rugged Alaskan face like weathered leather, calm hands on the controls. But he kept checking his instruments, frowning harder each time. Funny thing about this mountain, he said through the headset, voice tight. Been flying these skies 30 years. But every time I get near Hayes, my gear starts acting up. He wasn't exaggerating. The GPS flickered on and off. The altimeter froze for 5 seconds, then leaped. The radio crackled not random noise, but pulses like Morse code, too regular to be static. Through the scratched helicopter window, I finally saw it. Mount Hayes, a monster of ice and stone rising above the range like a sentinel, 13,000 feet tall. But it wasn't the height that made my stomach twist. It was the shape, geometric, almost unnatural. The way the ice draped over the rock, the symmetry of the ridges. It felt constructed, like architecture instead of geology. For the first time in my career, I felt something I couldn't put into a report. The mountain wasn't just there. It was watching. The glow made it look less like a natural formation and more like something built like ancient architecture worn smooth by time and weather. Ever been up there yourself? I asked Joe as the helicopter cut through the thin Alaskan air. He shook his head a little too quickly. Local folks won't go near it, he said, his eyes locked on the horizon. Say machines go dead near the peak, and that the ice sings. At night, I raised an eyebrow. Sings? Joe adjusted his grip on the controls. That's what they say. But locals say a lot of things. He paused. I've lost 2 drones trying to get close-up footage of that summit, he added finally. Both just stopped responding. Gone. Never found the wreckage. The research outpost site Echo wasn't much. Just a small network of prefab buildings linked by narrow walkways, squatting on a frozen stretch of tundra about 15 miles from Mount Hayes. As we descended, I could see the mountain clearly in the distance, towering and still like a white sentinel carved against the dull sky. There was something about it peaceful at first glance, but with an undertow of unease, like the calm before a storm. The team was minimal. Myself, David Park, a communications specialist, and Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead researcher. She struck me as someone who knew more than she was letting on. Elena had that pale, overstimulated look, someone who'd spent too many years under fluorescent lights in secure rooms with no windows. And too many secrets. As Joe's helicopter rose back into the sky, she stepped forward. "Welcome to Site Echo," she said, her voice calm, clipped. "I trust your flight was educational." That first night, while setting up my equipment and reviewing the project brief, something about the documentation nagged at me. Most geological surveys are thick with context, decades of mineral surveys, geological timelines, fault line data. But our files? Almost blank. Just a set of GPS coordinates, a blurry topographical scan, and a single line of instruction: locate and map all artificial structures within subsurface detection range. Artificial structures. Inside a mountain that had been shaped by tectonic collisions millions of years ago. I should have asked more questions. But the pay was excellent. And in my line of work, oil companies often got cagey, especially if they suspected rare earth. Minerals or anything worth staking a private claim over. That night, as I lay in my bunk, I heard the wind screaming across the tundra, a shrill cry that seemed to crawl in through the walls. But beneath it, just barely, there was something else, a low humming, subtle, rhythmic, almost musical. It came from the direction of the mountain. Entry 3, March 18th, 2024. Day 4, the data didn't make sense. The initial seismic scans came back, showing something. Not a cave, not a lava tube, not a mineral deposit. I've been reading seismic signatures for 20 years. I know what the Earth looks like under stress. This was different. A massive hollow space lay beneath Mount Hayes, nearly 2 miles down. It extended out from the mountain's core like the spokes of a wheel, but it wasn't natural. The walls were too clean, too even. The echo patterns from the sonic pulses suggested hard, smooth surfaces, geometric, manufactured. Then there were the frequencies. Every few hours, my equipment picked up a low, deep pulse. Not an earthquake. The frequency was wrong. It was too rhythmic, too timed, like a machine. Or a signal. I left my terminal and crossed to the main cabin. "David?" I called out. He looked up from his station, headphones around his neck. "Yeah?" "You. Picking up anything weird? Low frequency, repeating pattern." He frowned and reached for his headset. "Funny you ask. I've been getting interference since yesterday afternoon. Started around noon. It's single quotes S. Strange." He adjusted the knobs. "It's regular, too regular. I thought it might be stray radio traffic, but..." He hit a key. The speakers hissed, then let out a sequence of pulsing tones. Dash, dash, pause, dash, pause. The pattern repeated exactly 3 times. Then silence. 4 minutes later, it would start again. Like a clock. Elena emerged from her cramped office, a phone still pressed to her ear. She'd spent most of the day talking in low tones on encrypted satellite calls. "What kind of code is that?" she asked. David shrugged. "Not Morse, at least not standard. But it's structured, intentional." Elena's face had gone pale. "When did it start?" she asked. "About 6 hours after Dr. Chun began her deep seismic scan," David replied. "She and I exchanged a glance. That kind of timing was too precise to be coincidence. Later that night, alone at my station, I reviewed the deeper scans. Something new had appeared. Movement. The seismic data wasn't just showing a hollow. There were faint, fluctuating pressure readings inside the cavity. Several somethings were moving down there. Big enough to disturb air pressure. Big enough for my instruments to notice. I was staring at the readouts, heart pounding, when David's voice came crackling through the intercom. "Dr. Chun," he said, his voice tight, urgent. "You need to come here now." I sprinted to the communications room. David was staring at the infrared monitor, jaw clenched. The thermal image of Mount Hayes filled the screen, cold and still, the mountain glowing pale blue-white against the slightly warmer terrain around it, exactly what you'd expect. But then he pointed. "There," he said. At first, I didn't see it. Then I did. A single red-orange bloom deep beneath the mountain's core. Faint, but clear. Warmer than its surroundings, moving. And then another. And another. Something down there was stirring. But there were patches of warmth scattered across. The glacial surface, small moving heat signatures drifting across the ice. They weren't random. They moved with intent, following strange, calculated paths. Could be wildlife, I said, though I didn't believe it even as the words left my mouth. At 13,000 feet, on an Arctic glacier, in sub-zero temperatures, nothing lived out here. Not naturally. David didn't even look up. Look at how they're moving. He zoomed in on the infrared feed. I leaned closer. He was right. The heat signatures weren't meandering like animals. They weren't fleeing, hunting, or searching. They were tracing perfect geometric patterns across the glacier's sharp angles, looping curves, crisscrossing lines. It looked like something out of an engineering textbook, a microchip, a neural network. It's not an echo, David whispered. It's a beacon. Entry 4, March 20th, 2024. Day 6, the Stargate files. I couldn't sleep. The data didn't make sense. And Elena Vasquez's behavior was becoming more secretive by the hour. She avoided our questions, spoke in code on her calls, and seemed afraid, not cautious. Afraid. So I did what any scientist would do. When suspicion takes hold, I started digging. The server's public directories were standard geological data, weather logs, radio transmissions, but buried in an unindexed subdirectory marked historical_research. I found something I wasn't supposed to. A folder named CRV12B_Hayes site. Inside were dozens of files, classified reports, scanned documents, audio logs, and at the top, a header that stopped me cold. Project Stargated, heard of it in grad school. A CIA initiative from the Cold War era. They'd supposedly used psychic remote viewers to spy on Soviet secrets and explore paranormal phenomena. Most people thought it was a joke, a failure buried in some dusty basement of U.S. intelligence. This proved otherwise. One document was dated September 5, 10th, 1983, marked secret, nerve, subject, remote viewing session, Hayes anomaly. Viewer, subject 12, Ingo Swan. Monitor, Dr. Harold Puthoff. Here's an excerpt from the transcript. Target appears to be a large artificial structure underground. Very deep. I'm seeing metal, but not like ours. It's smoother, almost organic. There are beings here, tall, not human. They're watching something, watching us. I feel like they know I'm looking at them. They can sense me. This isn't right. They're sending something out. Thoughts like radar, but aimed at my mind. Session terminated by the viewer. Dr. Puthoff's notes followed. Subject 12 suffered acute psychological stress. Post-session. Reported persistent paranoia and a sense of being watched for weeks. Recommending Hayes site be reclassified as hostile. Further session suspended. There were more, dozens more. Remote viewers from different years, different backgrounds, describing the exact same thing. A vast artificial structure beneath Mount Hayes, not human, not dead, watching. A 1985 report was particularly disturbing. Viewer 7 identified the beings as watchers, entities that had apparently observed humanity for centuries. When asked about their purpose, the viewer went silent, then began to shake. According to the transcript, they muttered one chilling sentence before ending the session. You're not ready to know, but you will be useful. The final document was a scanned memo dated 1987, bearing the insignia of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Findings regarding Mount Hayes have been forwarded to Majestic 12, site designated Delta 6, civilian access. Within 50-mile radius prohibited without special clearance. Remote viewing operations targeting Mount Hayes are hereby suspended indefinitely. I sat back in my chair, heart racing, hands trembling. We weren't here to run a geological survey. We were here because the U.S. government had known for over 40 years that something was buried beneath this mountain. Something intelligent, something watching. And now, Now it was sending signals. Entry 5, March 21st, 2024. Day 7, the mountain wakes. The phenomena escalated overnight. I jolted awake to the sound of David swearing, typing furiously at his console. His eyes were bloodshot, locked on the flickering GPS monitors. "What's going on?" I asked. He didn't look away. "Every GPS unit is reporting a different location," I frowned. "Different?" "Yeah," he snapped. "According to these, we're in 3 places at once: Alaska, northern Canada, and the middle of the fucking Arctic Ocean." I blinked at the screen. He was right. The systems weren't failing randomly. The coordinates were being altered intentionally. It was subtle but precise. "It's like something's jamming the satellites," David muttered, "but not chaotically. It's feeding them false data, purposeful data." Dr. Vasquez burst into the room, pale and wide-eyed. Her hair was a mess, and the panic in her voice made my stomach turn. "We need to evacuate," she said flatly. "No build-up. No preamble." "What are you talking about?" I said, stepping toward her. "Elena, what the hell is really happening here?" Before she could respond, the base's proximity alarms erupted harsh, blaring tones that echoed through the metal walls. Something was coming, something large, enough to trigger our motion sensors, but invisible to every camera we had. We raced to the observation deck, hearts pounding. The landscape looked the same, flat, windswept, desolate empty dot, but the data said otherwise. The seismic monitors were going wild. Not a tremor movement, massive movement, like something enormous was tunneling through the earth itself. It was heading straight for us. David's voice was barely a whisper. "Whatever it is, it's awake." The voices started subtly at first, just a murmur, barely louder than the wind scraping across the ice. But as we stood there, listening, the sound grew clearer. Human voices, dozens of them, murmuring in perfect unison. The words were hard to make out, like echoes underwater, but there was a strange rhythm to it, something mesmerizing and unsettling. David suddenly ripped off his headphones with a sharp gasp, stumbling backward like he'd been burned. "It's coming." Through the radio, he said, eyes wide and pale. "Every frequency, every channel." I blinked at him, heart beginning to pound. "What are they saying?" He looked at me like he didn't quite know how to answer, terrified, as if saying it out loud might make it worse. "Coordinates," he whispered. "They're repeating GPS coordinates. Over and over again." We plugged the numbers into our system. They pointed to a spot on Mount Hayes about 2 miles up the southeastern face. We trained the binoculars on it and fell into stunned silence. The ice was cracking slowly, deliberately. A wide fracture cut across the glacial surface. Something was shifting beneath it. Not snow or rock, something huge. Something alive. It moved with weight, with purpose, like a sleeping beast turning under blankets of ancient ice. Dr. Vasquez grabbed my arm with sudden urgency. "We need to go, now, before..." She didn't get to finish her sentence. The mountain emitted a sound, a tone so deep and resonant that it stopped us all in our tracks. It wasn't a noise exactly. It was a feeling, a vibration that bypassed our ears and settled straight into our bones. The locals had warned us the ice could sing, but this wasn't the groaning of a glacier under stress. This was music, not of this earth, harmonies that made no sense, tones that bent in ways our brains weren't meant to understand. David stood up slowly, eyes distant and unfocused. "David?" I said, "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. He just walked, trance-like, toward the exit. Elena and I exchanged a terrified glance, then followed him into the cold, outside. He stood in the snow, staring up at the cracked face of Mount Hayes. His lips moved. We leaned in. He was whispering the coordinates, over and over. Like a prayer. It took both of us to drag him back into the shelter. He fought us the whole way, his body desperate to return to the mountain, to the voice, to the song. When we finally sedated him and strapped him to a cot, I noticed something on the window pane. While we struggled, David had traced symbols into the condensation with his finger. They weren't letters, they weren't numbers, but the moment I saw them, something clicked in my mind. I understood them, not consciously, but in the pit of my brain, in the place where nightmares live. They have always been here. Entry 6, March 22nd, 2024, Day 8. Descent. Despite Elena's desperate protests, I went back out. I couldn't ignore what we'd seen. The seismic readings were spiking. Something beneath Mount Hayes was waking up. And every part of my scientific brain screamed that this was history. Proof evidence of intelligence not from Earth, maybe not even from this reality. Loaded my gear onto a snowmobile and made for the mountain. The closer I got, the stranger things became. My compass spun like it had gone insane. My instruments blinked erratically, 1 minute recording sub-zero temperatures, the next showing a heat signature more fitting for a rainforest. The air itself seemed confused, as if it didn't quite belong. Then the voices returned. But these weren't the coordinated chants from the radio. These were individual, disjointed, whispering in languages I didn't know. Some sounded vaguely human, others didn't. The glacier crack was staggering up close, nearly 50 feet wide, dropping into utter blackness. But what made my breath catch wasn't its size. It was what waited at the bottom. Metal. Smooth, seamless, a surface that caught my flashlights, beam and bent it in ways that made my stomach churn. It wasn't just reflective, it moved, like the surface of water that didn't ripple. My eyes kept trying to see it as metal, but my brain kept screaming living tissue. Embedded within the surface were tangled structures, tubes, veins. They pulsed faintly, like they were carrying blood. Or thoughts. I set up my camera gear, fingers trembling, and began recording. Every frame, every detail, it all felt like I was documenting something wrong. This wasn't a building. It wasn't a machine. It was both and neither. It was something else. Something ancient and aware. As I moved closer, the feeling of being watched returned, but stronger. Not just watched. Scanned, measured. I felt like a bug beneath a microscope, cataloged by something with no concept of fear or mercy. My instruments began reacting to it. Not just picking up static or noise, but patterns. Complex pulses of electromagnetic energy, weaving like signals or language. Like thought made visible. Then deep in the structure, I saw it. A shadow, moving, long, fluid, with limbs or extensions. That didn't move like arms or legs, but in a way that set intention, purpose, intelligence. I held my breath and kept the camera rolling. I got about 30 seconds of footage before everything failed. Every battery dead, every lens cracked, circuits fried, gone in a blink, like it had reached out and decided I wasn't allowed to record it. And then came the silence. No equipment, no sound, just me and the stars above, faint light bouncing off the fractured ice. And in that stillness, I heard it. A whisper, not in my ears, but in my mind. It didn't speak words. It showed them. Images, concepts, meanings, and terror. The kind of terror that makes you forget your own name. It was breathing. Not a creature, the structure itself. Slow, deep, rhythmic. Each inhale and exhale came not from lungs, but from metal. The sound pulsed through the ice, into my boots, and up through my spine. It vibrated in my chest, a pressure I couldn't escape. And beneath it, barely audible, more a feeling than a sound, there was something else. Laughter. Not human, not joyous. Something old, something amused in a cold, clinical way. Entry 7, March 23rd, 2024, Day 9. They've always been here. I barely made it back to the outpost. The snowmobile's engine died twice, sputtering like it was choking on something it couldn't process. I had to navigate by starlight after my GPS unit stopped working. When it came back on, it wasn't showing anywhere on Earth. The coordinates were off-world places on Mars, Europa, even one labeled as Kepler 62f. Elena was waiting for me when I returned. She stood in the dim entryway of the outpost, silhouetted against the flickering light, holding a satellite phone. "There's someone who wants to talk to you," she said, her voice low, her expression unreadable. "Someone who's been waiting a long time." I took the phone. The voice that came through was calm, clear, and ancient in its tone, like someone who'd seen too much and said too little. "Dr. Chun," the woman said. "My name is Dr. Patricia Hamill. I was one of the original analysts for Project Stargate. I've been monitoring the situation at Mount Hayes for the past 40 years. Monitoring what situation?" I asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't make me feel better. "The situation you've just become part of," she replied. "Now tell me exactly what you saw in the glacier." So I did. I told her about the metallic surface, the movement within, the sense that I was being studied. I described the electromagnetic signals and the structure that felt half machine, half organism. I didn't hold back. I couldn't. She didn't interrupt. I heard the soft scratch of a pen on paper. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then she said, "What you've discovered isn't new. Mount Hayes is one of 3 confirmed observation stations in the northern hemisphere. The others are beneath Greenland's ice sheet and deep in the Siberian wilderness. We believe they've been here for millennia long before recorded history." "Observation stations?" I echoed. "Observing us," she said. "Humanity, our growth, our behavior, our technology, our potential. Think of them as research posts, and we were the subjects." The words hit like a punch to the chest. "Are you saying we're being studied?" "Yes," she said. "By entities we call the Watchers. Remote viewers first reported them during classified sessions in the late 70s. They're not human. Highly intelligent. Their technology makes ours look primitive, stone tools compared to theirs. And they've been involved in our development." "Involved how?" I asked. "Subtle manipulations. Electromagnetic fields that influence brain activity. Broadcast frequencies that nudge entire populations toward certain behaviors. They don't interfere directly. They guide, shape, prepare. Prepare us for what?" I whispered. She hesitated. "We don't know," she finally said. "But all indicators suggest their observation phase is ending. The activity at Mount Hayes, the broadcasts, the tone, the voices, it all points to the next stage. Contact." A chill ran down my spine. "But this won't be peaceful. This isn't the kind of exchange Hollywood imagines. There will be no welcoming speeches, no shared knowledge. This will be a harvesting." The word rang in my ears like a gunshot. "Dr. Chun," she continued, voice hardening, "understand something important. You didn't discover them. They allowed you to. Every researcher who's come close to this truth was chosen. Not randomly, chosen for their minds, their roles, their capacity to be used." I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. "You're saying they're recruiting me? Whether you know it or not. The only question now is whether you'll be useful willingly, or if they'll make you useful." And then nothing. The line went dead. Entry 8, March 24th, 2024, Day 10, the cut transmission. Elena vanished during the night. No signs of a struggle. Her quarters were neat, her gear gone. Every trace of her existence erased with quiet precision. Except for one note. It was short, written in her meticulous script and left on her cot. "They called," I answered. "Don't try to follow." David was still sedated, but restless. He muttered the coordinates in his sleep, lips twitching with strange phonemes. Sometimes he'd raise a finger and trace invisible symbols in the air. Eyes wide open, but seeing something I couldn't. I was alone, 15 miles from the nearest human soul, in a failing outpost, surrounded by endless snow and something beneath it. My equipment was degrading fast, battery life cut in half, wires frying, hard drives glitching. And every time I tried to reach the outside world, my signal would drop or worse, be replaced by that tone. The same pulse we heard from the mountain. The one that felt like it reached inside your skull and tuned you. But I couldn't stay silent. The world needed to know. I spent the morning copying my data to multiple drives. I prepared emergency packets, redundant transmissions with all my logs, footage, and instrument readings. Every cable was double-checked. Every antenna aligned at exactly 2:17 p.m. I began broadcasting. This is Dr. Sarah Chun, transmitting. From Site Echo, Mount Hayes, Alaska. I am broadcasting evidence of non-human intelligence operating on Earth. If you are receiving this transmission, please relay it to every scientific institution, government agency, and media outlet you can reach. We are not alone, and we are not in control. The signal held for 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Then the static began. A low hiss that grew louder with each passing second. Beneath it, layered, hidden voices. So many voices, hundreds of voices clear. Unified and unmistakably human filled the airwaves. They were speaking English this time. Dr. Chun, your work is complete. Please prepare for extraction. The power inside the facility surged and flickered. Lights dimmed, then flared, matching the rhythm of the voices. Outside the window, across the frozen tundra, shapes were moving tall, impossibly tall, with limbs too long and proportions just wrong enough to make my stomach churn. They glided, not walked, barely touching the snow, like shadows cast by something just out of sync with our world. I lunged for the mic, trying to continue the broadcast. This is Dr. Chun. Repeat, this is not a drill. They are, but the watchers drowned me out. Your species has been prepared. The observation phase is concluded. Integration will begin shortly. Do not resist. Resistance is not compatible with your new purpose. They were closer now. I could see their outlines flickering like bad reception. They weren't entirely here. They phased in and out of existence, part projection, part physical form. The snow didn't crunch under their feet. They didn't breathe steam. They weren't obeying the laws of this world. Inside, my equipment began dying one piece at a time. Screens blinked off. Hard drives whined and corrupted. The backup generators kicked in, then sputtered and died like everything else. But I managed to hit record. Just once more. If anyone hears this, they've been watching us longer than we've existed as a species. Mount Hayes is just one of their stations. There are others hidden. Find them. Expose them. Don't let them. A thunderous impact cut the feed. The roof groaned under sudden pressure. Dust rained down. The whole facility trembled. I looked up through the skylight that something had landed. Not landed, settled. Something massive. Something alive. Something wrong. Its surface shimmered with metal that wasn't quite metal, moving like muscle, twitching with light. It pulsed with tubes, cables, or veins. Mechanical and organic in one. And from it, the voices came not through the speakers anymore, but inside my skull. You have been useful, Dr. Sarah Chun. Your knowledge, your documentation, your psychological profile. All exactly as required. You will continue to be useful. I turned to run, but my body betrayed me. My legs didn't move. My limbs were paralyzed, stiff as stone. It wasn't fear, it was them. The interference was like being submerged in static. My thoughts came apart in fragments, words losing meaning, time losing sequence. I fell to my knees, eyes blurring, breath shallow. But before I passed out, I saw something through the window. Mount Hayes. It was changing. The snow was sliding off in thick sheets, revealing smooth, seamless metal beneath. The entire peak split open, unfolding like a flower under a midnight sun. Light poured out from within, sickly green, bioluminescent, pulsing in slow waves. And from that light, fins emerged. Not ships, not beings, something else. Hybrids of technology and flesh, wingless but lifting effortlessly into the sky. They moved in formation, graceful and perfect, heading south toward the cities, toward the people. The integration had begun. Final entry. Timestamp corrupted if you're reading this. I didn't make it out. They're not aliens, they're gardeners. Where? The crop, the harvest has begun. Mount Hayes was just the beginning. Look for the signal. Listen for the frequency, but don't look too long. Don't listen too hard. Once you start paying attention, they start paying attention to you. The mountain remembers. The ice remembers. They've always been here. They've always been waiting. And now, they're awake.